the Diesel and the Mamba, Thunder and Lightning, Superman and Batman. At their peak, Shaq and Kobe were arguably the most dominant duo in the history of the NBA. In their time together, they were able to win 3 championships in 4 finals trips. So obviously, they were successful on the court. But as the years go on, some may ask, just what made them so special outside of the fact that they were simply winning a lot? Well, for one, Shaq and Kobe were 2 alphas in the most literal sense. Each guy was a leader, capable of leading his team to a championship. Each guy was unwilling to take a submissive role on the team, as they were each driven by their insatiable desire to be the best of the best. Although both legends were similar in terms of their killer instinct, they couldn't possibly be any more different when it came to their playstyles and talents. Shaq was a bruising and punishing force. At 7 foot 1 inches tall and at 330 pounds of mostly muscle, Shaq bullied interior defenders in the paint. As Kobe once stated, most players who are above 7 feet tall are gentle giants. They're basically insecure about the fact that they're much bigger than everyone else, and compensate for that mass with gentleness. According to Kobe, Shaq did not have this dynamic, as he would bully and physically punish opposing defenders with no shame or regret about his physical advantages. On the other hand, there was Kobe, who was much more skilled and elegant in his approach. Shaq was the jaw-dropping power, while Kobe was the mesmerizing artist. Both players were worthy of being labeled the most difficult player to guard in the NBA, but they each had their own unique ways of doing it. Shaq was a bulldozer who would tire out opposing defenders and put them in foul trouble in the first 3 quarters. But Kobe was the closer, as his great free throw shooting and his ability to create his own shot made him the go-to guy for the Lakers in the closing minutes. In a way, Kobe and Shaq had the most big brother, little brother type of relationship that the game has ever seen. They were teammates who were determined to win together, but they were arguably the most competitive with one another. They drove each other to be better, but they didn't necessarily like each other in the process. Like brothers, they respected and challenged one another, but no one was capable of annoying them as much as one another. Even after their ways had parted, and even after they were done winning championships together, they still spent most of their time thinking about each other more so than anyone else. Despite being on complete opposite ends of the country, they were still determined to stick it to the other guy, and in a way, they both did, as they continued to drive each other to be better, even after they were no longer teammates. This is what made Shaq and Kobe so special. They were 2 masters of their craft, who couldn't be more different stylistically, but they were a chip off the same block with their tenacity. As the proverb goes, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. But what many don't consider is that iron sharpening iron requires friction, and Kobe and Shaq had plenty of that. That friction-filled relationship is what led them to being the sharpest tools they could possibly be for the task at hand. There have been many other incredible duos throughout the NBA's rich history, but even with that being said, there has never been a dynamic duo quite like this one. Not before or since. This is a topic I've wanted to tackle for a while because it's something that has people pretty divided whenever it comes up. And as one of the ultimate Kobe Bryant fans who watched basically the entirety of his basketball career, I thought I should give my perspective on it as well. Now, when it comes to Kobe's abilities as an offensive player, there isn't a tremendous amount to be debated. Simply put, he's one of the greatest scorers in NBA history. He's currently 4th on the NBA's all-time scoring list. He has the 2nd greatest scoring performance of all time, which is when he dropped 81 points on the Raptors. And he has the longest streak of 40-point games and 50-point games by anyone not named Wilt Chamberlain. If you ask me personally, I don't think Kobe was the greatest scorer in NBA history, but I do believe he was the most impressive scorer of all time, as no one could consistently make the insanely difficult shots that he could make on a regular basis. To me, this aspect of Kobe's legacy is unwavering, and most people tend to agree that he's one of the greatest scorers of all time. But then, there's the other side of the court, and this is where things get a bit more shaky. If I asked you if Kobe Bryant was one of the greatest defensive players in NBA history, what would your answer be? He certainly has the reputation of being a great defensive player, and in numerous instances, Kobe displayed what he was capable of on that end of the court. To me, the greatest example of Kobe's tenacity and defensive excellence was when he led the Redeem team in the 2008 Summer Olympics. Kobe understood full well that with that stacked roster of offensive superstars, he wouldn't need to be as aggressive offensively, and instead decided to focus his energy on the defensive end of the court. That summer, he accepted the assignment of shutting down the best player on the opposing teams. And Kobe's Olympic teammates have spoken at length about how his mindset and leadership motivated the team defensively, which helped them secure the gold. At least in that time frame, Kobe was absolutely elite defensively, as he demonstrated his lockdown abilities when he set his mind to it. But that begs the question, did Kobe always set his mind on being a lockdown defensive player? Here's something to consider. In the history of the NBA, Kobe is tied for the most first-team all-defensive selections with a total of 9. The players he is tied with are Michael Jordan, Kevin Garnett, and Gary Payton. So based on that, some may consider him on the same level as those other defensive players. Well, the thing is, of the players in that group, Kobe is the only player who never won the Defensive Player of the Year award. Jordan won the award in 1988, Gary Payton won it in 1996, and Kevin Garnett won it in 2008. In fact, Kobe never finished higher than 3rd overall in the DPOY race, and other than that single season in 2000, he never finished higher than 5th. Now some bring up the point that the all-defensive selections and the DPOY award is all based on voting by the media. So in a sense, there's no objective truth to a player being considered as better or worse based on those awards, because it all comes down to their opinions. While there is some truth to that point, you also have to consider the aspects that are less about opinions and more about the bottom line. For example, defensive statistics. Given how Jordan and Kobe have the same amount of first-team all-defensive selections, and Kobe actually has more defensive selections overall, let's focus a bit on a comparison between these two defensively, seeing how they both play at the same position and with similar styles. Jordan specialized as a defensive pickpocket. He was good at reading defenses and jumping the passing lanes. With his massive hands and with his tremendous strength, he was also very good at stripping the ball from the opposing ball handler. In Jordan's first 9 seasons before his retirement in 1993, he didn't have a single season where he didn't average at least 2 steals per game. In 3 of those seasons, he actually led the league in steals per game. On the other hand, Kobe only had 1 season in his 20-year career where he averaged at least 2 steals per game, and he never once led the league in that category. Despite the fact that Kobe played 5 more seasons and nearly 300 more games in his career, Jordan actually leads Bryant on the all-time steals list by nearly 600 steals. To put it simply, when it comes to forcing turnovers and stripping the ball from the opponent, MJ was on another level entirely. So let's look at another aspect of defense, blocking shots. Earlier in Kobe's career was when he was at his best as a shot blocker, which makes sense since his explosiveness and his vertical leap was at its greatest during his Froby days. With that being said, Kobe only had 1 season in his entire NBA career where he averaged at least 1 block per game, and that was a lockout-shortened season in 1999. On the other hand, Jordan had 4 seasons where he averaged at least 1 block per game, getting as high as 1.6 in 1988, which is actually the highest blocks per game average by a guard in NBA history. Along with that, MJ also had a higher career average than Kobe as well. There are other stats that should factor into this comparison as well, like advanced stats, and one of the examples of that is defensive win shares. At Kobe's best in the year 2000, he had a grand total of 4.5 defensive win shares over the course of that season. On the other hand, Jordan exceeded that total in 9 different seasons of his career, getting as high as 6.2 in 1996. Now listen, clearly all of these defensive stats are in favor of MJ. And I'm not bringing these up in an attempt to slander Kobe by any means, as he was at the very least a very good defensive player, but I'm simply pointing out that there's layers to this thing. Now, with all of these stats mentioned, some might want to point out that defensive statistics aren't always the best metric to understand the greatness of a defensive player. And you know what? That's a decent point. For example, Dennis Rodman is widely recognized as one of the greatest players of all time by pretty much everyone. Yet Rodman was nothing terribly impressive from a statistical standpoint, as he never had one season where he averaged at least one steal or one block in the entirety of his NBA career. Some of you may be wondering, if that's the case, what makes him a great defensive player? Well, that would be his skill that doesn't show up on the stat sheet, which is his smothering on-ball defense. A defender can be all over the offensive player and be consistently forcing him into making bad passes and taking bad shots. And for the most part, this wonderful defensive quality will not show up on the stat sheet. So with that in mind, let's revisit the comparison and evaluate how good Kobe was as an on-ball defender. A lot of this relies on personal experience and the eye test. From my observations, Kobe was a much better on-ball defender earlier in his career, as he began conserving some of his energy as he got later into his career. I also believe that Kobe was what I call a situational defender. The Mamba was the kind of elite defensive player who would pick his spots, based on the gravity of the moment, who he's up against, and what he's trying to prove. I don't think it will come as a surprise to anyone when I say that Kobe didn't always have the same intensity defensively as he had in the 2008 Summer Olympics. That's because he picks his spots, and that was a spot he picked. Obviously, we've all seen the highlights of Kobe putting the clamps on guys like Dwayne Wade and Kyrie Irving, and in large part, that was because Kobe accepted the challenge of a one-on-one superstar matchup. That was a spot he picked. But as a longtime Lakers fan, I also remember many instances where Kobe got a little lazy on defense and maybe relied a little too heavily on guys like Andrew Bynum to contest his cutting man at the rim. Although Kobe was capable of being the best defender on the court at any time, I also don't remember him bringing his best effort as consistently as guys like Jordan and Rodman. Don't just take it from me though, take it from his championship head coach, Phil Jackson. In his book called The Last Season, which was about the 2004 Lakers, the Zen Master had this to say about the Mamba. Kobe's defense, to be accurate, has faltered in recent years, despite his presence on the league's all-defensive team. The voters have been seduced by his remarkable athleticism and spectacular steals, but he hasn't played sound, fundamental defense. Mesmerized by the ball, he gambles too frequently, putting us out of position, forcing rotations that leave a man wide open, and doesn't keep his feet on the ground. This was Phil's honest perspective after the team imploded with their finals loss in 2004. Since Jackson was then retired at that point, that was probably the most genuine response we could have got from him. That was far from the last time that Phil would comment on Kobe's defensive abilities. And around the year 2010, Phil said that Kobe started winning some of his defensive selections based off of his tenacious reputation and not so much of his actual play on the court. Now, it's no secret that Phil liked to play mind games with his players, and it's possible that he was saying this as a way of motivating his star player to step up his game. Now, whether or not that was the case, I kind of agree with Phil's assessment. Although Kobe made a total of 12 all-defense teams, a total of 9 or 10 probably would have been more accurate, as it appeared clear to me that he had become vastly more selective about giving his best defensive efforts. So at the end of the day, where do I stand on Kobe's defensive abilities? Well, like I said before, he was a top defensive player who was capable of being the best defender on the court any given night, and many times he was. The problem with his defense, according to Phil Jackson and myself, is that Kobe wasn't as consistent as other great defenders, and he didn't have the longevity in that area either. In my own words, I would say that Kobe was a very, very good defensive player. But unlike some other Kobe fans, I think it's a step too far to say that he was one of the greatest defensive players of all time. So every once in a while, there's this weird thing that happens in basketball media where everyone seems to be dogpiling on one specific player or on one specific legend simultaneously. We've been witnessing that fairly recently, and in this case, Shaquille O'Neal is the target. So there's 3 instances that I want to talk about. The first is the debate on First Take between Stephen A. and Mad Dog. The second is what Bill Simmons said recently on his podcast, where he compared the modern Joel Embiid to Shaquille O'Neal. And third is the thing Shaquille O'Neal has been saying about himself. Yes, believe it or not, I have Shaq as one of the people who needs to stop disrespecting the legacy of Shaquille O'Neal. First off, let's tackle the perspective of Mad Dog on First Take. Take a listen to his thoughts on the Diesel.
First off, we got to hear Shaq now do this. Shaq is what, the 5th best center in the history of the NBA?
What?
Fifth.
What?
Shaq. What do you mean, what?
Who's the 4 ahead of Shaquille O'Neal? Have
like
you
me to
lost
name,
your
you want me to
damn
name
mind?
him for you?
What?
You want me to name
Sure,
him?
go ahead. Go ahead.
Kareem.
Okay.
Wilt.
No.
I'm not giving it to Wilt.
No, you guys are crazy.
You're not giving it to Wilt.
No.
You're not going to put Wilt Chamberlain, who averaged 50 points a game and scored 100 a game in 30 minutes.
Who is a foot taller than 99% of the league?
Yeah, the most dominant player in NBA history. Who is stopping Shaquille O'Neal in any era?
And who's Tim Duncan is better than he is. Tim Duncan's better. And I tell you something, 2 other guys.
That's not a center. Tim Duncan's
Elijah Wan is better. Who beat him 4 straight games.
2-time champion of Shaq's 4.
Shaq's
no
4.
scoring titles to Shaq's 2. What are you talking about?
And I tell you somebody else who's better. You can laugh all you want.
I love Hakeem, but he won Shaq.
Oh, he's a better player than Shaq. Oh, God, he's better.
First off,
he played Shaq and he beat him 4 straight games.
Define me better player.
He's not better than Moses Malone.
What?
There's no chance. Don't give me that
Oh,
what.
my Lord, why are you allowed to talk basketball? I love Moses Malone. Elite rebounder.
You think Shaq?
Moses Malone was not Shaq.
Not a chance.
And he was great, but he wasn't Shaq.
Help, Lord.
Malone led the league in rebounding 6 consecutive years.
So what?
He won 2 MVPs.
So did Rodman.
So now that you've seen this recent episode of grown adults screaming at each other, what are some takeaways? Well, for one, Mad Dog said that Shaq was the 5th greatest center ever, but then he went on to name 5 players ahead of him, which were Kareem, Wilt Chamberlain, Tim Duncan, Hakeem Olajuwon, and Moses Malone. Naturally, this would place Shaq as the 6th greatest center ever, even though he said 5th. Whether or not you consider Tim Duncan primarily as a power forward or a center is certainly debatable, so I won't fault people either way on that one. Now I've got to point out, when Mad Dog said Wilt Chamberlain, Stephen A. Smith responded with one of my biggest pet peeves in basketball, as he stated that Wilt Chamberlain was a foot taller than 99% of the league. This isn't even close to being true, and if you want to hear my breakdown of that, check out my recent video that exposes this myth. Hakeem Olajuwon is an interesting one to have ahead of Shaq, and honestly, I go back and forth on this ranking. Mad Dog states that Hakeem swept Shaq in 4 straight games, and he's correct on that, as the Rockets won the 1995 championship over Shaq's Orlando Magic. But using that as a way of saying Hakeem is better is way too simplistic. For one, although Shaq was incredible, he wasn't yet in his peak form, which he later experienced in Los Angeles. That matchup was between an experienced 32-year-old Hakeem Olajuwon versus a young and developing 23-year-old Shaq. So that's not the most fair comparison when you're looking at their careers as a whole. The other thing that's worth mentioning is that saying that the Rockets swept the Magic is the far more accurate way of stating it, rather than saying that Hakeem swept Shaq. Because if you watched that series, and if you look at their production, you'll see that it was a pretty even battle with a slight edge to Hakeem. Over that series, the Dream averaged about 33, 11, and 5 on 48% shooting from the field, while Shaq put up 28, 12, and 6 on 59%. Beyond that series, Stephen A. mentions that Shaq has 4 rings to Hakeem's 2. Which is true, but Hakeem didn't have the luxury of playing alongside of a lethal Kobe Bryant and Dwayne Wade during his prime years. So again, maybe not the most fair comparison. Shaq did have 2 scoring titles, but Hakeem has 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards, which is something that Shaq never achieved. Personally, I think Hakeem is the greatest defensive player since Bill Russell, and it's a large gap between second and third. Honestly, I have no problem with either Shaq or Olajuwon being ranked higher, and I can make an argument either way. But then he took it to another level entirely when he said Moses Malone. Listen, I'm a little frustrated he said this because I personally believe that Moses is usually one of the top 3 most underrated players of all time. But naturally, by pitting him against Shaquille O'Neal, he's inviting people to criticize him instead of appreciate him. Moses was simply one of the greatest rebounders of all time. And as Mad Dog said, he led the NBA in rebounding 6 times in his career, which is a feat that Shaq could only dream of, as he never led the NBA in rebounding. With that being said, Shaq is without question a better rim protector than Moses, and he's a vastly better scorer as well. In Moses Malone's lengthy career, he only had 2 seasons where he averaged at least 26 points per game. On the other hand, Shaq did that every season for 10 years straight. Add on the fact that Shaq has 4 championships to Moses' 1 and 14 All-NBA teams to Moses' 8, and yeah, Shaq is without question higher on the all-time list. People forget that for 3 or 4 straight years of basketball, every team outside of Los Angeles was trying to stop Shaq, and would spend entire off-seasons making moves to adjust to him. He was the league's gravitational pull during his best in the NBA, and nowadays people are taking that for granted. Now that ESPN clip wasn't the most disrespectful thing to Shaq in this video, it's this next one. Take a listen to these recent comments from Bill Simmons on his podcast.
This Embiid season though, just quickly, holy shit. So he's averaging 35 points a game. I think he's the best offensive center since Kareem in 1972. Kareem in 72, 34.8 points a game, 57% field goal. Embiid is 35 points a game, 55% field goal. Here's the thing. Termini mentioned this last week on the podcast, and this is the most important Embiid point, and this is why he has a case for being the best offensive scoring center that we've seen since Wilt Chamberlain. He makes his free throws. He's at 89.3% for his free throws this year. He's making 10.3 free throws a game out of 11.6 attempts. Shaq in 2000, Shaq averaged 29.7 points a game in his MVP season in 2000. Embiid was 35 points a game. Shaq was 57% from field goals. Embiid's 55. What's the difference? Shaq made 5.5 out of 10.4 free throws a game. Embiid makes almost 5 more free throws a game, which is exactly the difference in their points per game. And on top of it, you can't foul him at the end of games. So I have Shaq, I don't know, he's like 12th or 13th in my pantheon. At least this version of Embiid right now is just a better player than Shaq. He is. Because Shaq was a 44-minute overpowering guy, and in the playoffs against the wrong team, whatever. But those last 4 minutes, that's when Kobe was so important, and you know all that stuff. But Shaq's free throw shooting was an absolute unequivocal liability for them. And Embiid's free throw shooting is a legitimate strength for the Sixers. So, Jesus, 35 points a game and shooting almost 90% from 3, and you're 7'2". Unbelievable.
Alright, now before I pick this apart, I want you to understand I'm actually a big fan of Bill Simmons. In many ways, I admire this guy, considering how he's simply a basketball superfan who built his brand on the power of his passion. In many ways, I'm trying to follow the path that he set out. This is also my copy of the Book of Basketball, which is a book he wrote and is an awesome read. So with all of these things considered, I'm actually surprised to hear him make such a casual conclusion in this instance. Looking at different eras and seeing a recent guy averaging 35 and one guy averaging 30, and then concluding that the more recent guy is better simply because 35 is higher than 30 is one of the most surface level takes that I've heard. Since the NBA merger in 1976, this is the highest scoring NBA season ever. In today's NBA, teams are averaging 115.5 points per game, and in Shaq's 99-2000 MVP season, teams were averaging only 97.5 points per game. And in all of Shaq's seasons with the Lakers, that was the only year where the league average was above 97 points. For a multitude of reasons, offensive statistics are ridiculously inflated in the modern game. There's triple-doubles galore, there's back-to-back 20-point and 20-assist nights, 40 and 50-point games are a nightly occurrence, and a rookie flirted with a quadruple-double while having a minutes restriction. In the modern season, 14 players are averaging at least 26 points per game, and in Shaq's MVP season, he was one of only 2 players to average at least 26. I'm writing this script on January 1st, 2024, and as of this moment, there have been 462 30-point games in the 2023 to 2024 season. In the totality of the 1999 to 2000 season, there was a total of 502 30-point games. So obviously, the total is close. But it shouldn't be, considering the fact that modern teams are only 32 games into the 82-game regular season. This means that this current year will far exceed the amount of 30-point performances of the entire 99 to 2000 season, well before we've even hit the halfway point. If that doesn't tell you how inflated today's stats are, then nothing will. The numbers being inflated is just one of 3 reasons why these comments are ridiculous by Bill Simmons. The second reason is because it's insanely premature. We are just over 1/3 into an NBA regular season, and we're giving someone the title of the greatest scoring center since Kareem, simply because of what he's done in a very small sample size. 32 games into the 2019 to 2020 NBA season, James Harden was averaging a whopping 38.3 points per game. People were speculating if he would average 40 that year, and at that point, some were even referring to him as the greatest scorer since Michael Jordan. But then, he dropped off significantly, and averaged just 30.8 points for the rest of the year, dropping his seasonal average to 34.3. Now in hindsight, those comments about Harden look ridiculous, and people can now see how these analysts were slaves of the moment. Listen, I don't care if it's 1964, 1994, or 2024. Averaging 35 points per game on tremendous efficiency is incredibly impressive and worth appreciating. And from that perspective, Joel Embiid certainly deserves his due credit. But if you're gonna give him the title of the greatest offensive center since Kareem, then you can't just ignore the context of the era, like the faster pace of play, like the existence of the defensive 3-second rule which opens up the painted area, and the less frequent calls for traveling. The third reason why Bill's comments are absurd is because, good God, the playoffs actually matter. How are you going to give someone the title of the greatest offensive player when that same player isn't even great when the games actually matter? In the entire 2023 playoffs, Embiid averaged just 23.7 points on 43.1% shooting and 17.9% from 3-point range. In the entire 2022 playoffs, Embiid averaged 23.6 points on 48.4% shooting and 21.2% from 3-point range. He's in his late 20s, and these are the prime years of his career, yet he has a tendency of coming up incredibly small offensively in the playoffs. Meanwhile, these were the averages that Shaq was putting up for 3 years in the NBA Finals at this same age, and at a time that producing offense was much more difficult. Plain and simple, this shouldn't even be a conversation. What Embiid is doing roughly a third into the regular season is impressive, but he hasn't yet earned his way into the conversation with Shaq of the greatest scoring center since Kareem. So at this point of the video, we've seen ESPN analysts disrespect Shaq, we've seen a podcaster disrespect Shaq, and now we're going to take a look at Shaq disrespecting Shaq. When it comes to personalities, the Diesel is one of the most fascinating ones that I've ever followed. He almost seems bipolar at points. Sometimes he's the most egotistical person in the room. As he'll flaunt his 4 rings, he'll declare himself as the most dominant player ever, and he'll speak of himself in third person. But then at other times, you won't find a more humble athlete. Shaq recently said that Steph Curry is better than him. Years ago, he said that Giannis was better than him at the same age. He said that Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, and Hakeem Olajuwon were all better. Recently, he said that at no point was he ever better than Kobe Bryant and Dwayne Wade, which is crazy when you consider how he was once teammates with a fresh out of high school Kobe Bryant, who was averaging just 7 points, while Shaq was averaging 26 and 12. In 2001, he said that Kobe was the best player in the world, despite the fact that Shaq was the defending MVP and Finals MVP. In 1997, he tried to decline his spot among the 50 greatest players of all time, so a more veteran player could take his spot. I'm a big believer in letting others praise you and not doing it yourself. But at the same time, Shaq's humility and dismissiveness of himself has gone so far that I think it's starting to affect how he's remembered. This was a guy who was one vote away from a unanimous MVP. This is a guy who averaged 35 and 15 over 3 straight NBA Finals, which is a championship accomplishment that can only be rivaled by the great Michael Jordan. Shaq was a guy who shaped the Western Conference in the early 2000s. And sure, he wasn't a great foul shooter, but I've never seen a player put more bodies in foul trouble than Shaq did at his peak. Shannon Sharpe and many other talking heads have regurgitated the narrative that Shaq didn't have great longevity due to his lack of fitness. And although that's true to a small extent, it's definitely massively overblown. For goodness sake, Shaq finished as a top 4 finalist in the MVP voting, a whopping 12 seasons apart, which very few legends can even claim. If it wasn't for Wilt Chamberlain, he would be universally recognized as the most dominant player in NBA history. And without question, he's one of the top 3 greatest finals performers of all time, which is, after all, where legacies are built. So at this point, I don't care if Shaq keeps disrespecting himself. If you want to authentically claim that you know basketball, then you'll stop disrespecting Shaquille O'Neal. Next, I'll tell them about my favorite player, Kobe Bryant. I'll tell them that from a stats and accolades standpoint, it's hard to argue that Kobe was the greatest player of all time. But when I was watching him at his best, night in and night out, I had never seen a basketball player more impressive in my entire life. At least 4 or 5 times a game, Kobe would hit shots that would leave me awestruck. It didn't matter if he was off balance, if he was 40 feet away, if he was double teamed, or if he was falling out of bounds. Every single shot was within his range, and it got to the point that I expected every shot to go in, and was somewhat surprised when it didn't. Before or since, I've never seen anyone else who could regularly make bad shots look like good shots. They were one of the most dominant and iconic tandems that the league has ever seen, and as teammates, they played 8 seasons together, went to the NBA Finals 4 times, and won 3 NBA championships. The thing is, there are many narratives about their time together as superstars, and one of the most common narratives was that Shaq carried Kobe. You hear all kinds of fans, critics, and even analysts make these claims, but is there any legitimacy to it? Today, I'll be answering that as I'm speaking from experience, considering how I watched nearly every single Laker game during that era. In order to come to a conclusion on whether or not Shaq carried Kobe, all we have to do is look at the 3 seasons where they won the championship, seeing how those are the only ones that matter in this instance. Their first championship run came in the 1999 to 2000 season, and with Shaq in his prime MVP form and Kobe ascending as a young superstar, they completely steamrolled the Western Conference, finishing with a 67-15 record. Although the Lakers were running the triangle offense under Phil Jackson and Tex Winter, make no mistake, the regular offensive game plan was designed to run its way through Shaq, as the Lakers played an inside and out style of basketball. Kobe would have plenty of opportunities in isolation plays, but the vast majority of the time, the Lakers were looking to feed the big man down low. It was normal for Phil Jackson to ask Kobe to stop looking to score so much in order to get Shaq more involved. But when Shaq was having scoring streaks of his own, Jackson almost never reined him in order to give Kobe more opportunities, which is further evidence that Los Angeles looked to run their offense primarily through O'Neal. Especially during the regular season, Shaq held a strong advantage over Kobe statistically, as the Diesel averaged 29.7 points, 13.6 rebounds, 3.8 assists, and 3 blocks on 57.4% shooting. Not only was Shaq likely the most dominant offensive player throughout the regular season, but he also finished as that season's runner-up for the Defensive Player of the Year award. Now compare his production to the Mamba, and you'll see just how big of a gap there was between the two in terms of impact, as the 21-year-old Kobe put up just 22.5 points, 6.3 rebounds, 4.9 assists, and 1.6 steals on 46.8% shooting. Again, that's quite impressive for a developing star who's in his early 20s, but there was no denying that Shaq was clearly the superior player at this point. But as we all know, the NBA championship is won and lost in the playoffs, not the regular season. The first round was a hard-fought best-of-5 series that went the distance. It was against their rivals, the Sacramento Kings. Although Shaq was likely the MVP of that series, Kobe was no slouch either, as he put up a monstrous stat line of his own. In the second round, the Lakers handily defeated the Phoenix Suns 4-1, and Shaq once again clearly outshined Kobe in terms of production. With that being said, Kobe's impact was still tremendously significant throughout the series, as he not only poured in decent numbers offensively, but he also completely locked down Phoenix's all-star point guard Jason Kidd, who shot awful percentages and committed a total of 18 turnovers thanks mostly to the Mamba smothering him consistently. In the Western Conference Finals, the Lakers and Blazers had a hard-fought 7-game series. Once again, Shaq clearly outproduced Kobe offensively, but Bryant was incredible defensively and even averaged more block shots that series than Shaq did. One thing that's often forgotten is that the Lakers were heading into the fourth quarter of Game 7 trailing by a whopping 13 points. And although the famous lob from Kobe to Shaq is the iconic moment in people's minds, many people don't realize that it was Kobe who led the charge that saved the Lakers season, as he outscored Shaq, out-assisted him, out-rebounded him, and out-blocked him with half the amount of turnovers. In other words, one may go as far as saying that Kobe was the one who carried the Lakers in the most crucial game of their season. On to the NBA Finals now, where the Lakers and Pacers went to 6 games before Los Angeles eventually clinched their first title in over a decade. Shaq was named the Finals MVP of that series, and rightly so, as he completely and utterly outclassed Kobe statistically, while playing in all 6 games, compared to Kobe, who missed nearly 2 whole games due to his famous ankle injury. Bryant did have that iconic overtime sequence in Game 4, where he took over the game after Shaq had fouled out and hit 3 incredibly clutch shots to seal the win for Los Angeles. Based on that game alone, you have to recognize that Kobe at least had somewhat of a positive impact on the series. But given how much Shaq dominated throughout the rest of the series, it still may be fair to say that O'Neal carried the Lakers in these finals. The thing is, in all 3 of the Lakers' championship runs, the NBA championship was likely decided in the Western Conference Finals, since the 2 best teams overall were clearly represented by the West. If Kobe doesn't come up clutch to defeat Portland in 7 games, then Shaq isn't able to dominate the NBA Finals in the first place. So in conclusion, is it fair to say that Shaq carried Kobe in the 2000 season? I would say that it's at least plausible, and I would respect someone's opinion either way. But one thing that can't be argued is that Shaq was clearly Batman in their first championship run, while Kobe played the more complementary role of Robin. Now let's tackle the 2000 to 2001 season. Kobe's individual skills took a huge leap forward this season, as him and Shaq had nearly identical scoring averages at the end of the regular season. But that's where they began their historic undefeated run through the Western Conference playoffs. Once again, it was the popular belief among people who followed the NBA that the Western Conference was much stronger than the Eastern Conference during this era. And with that being said, Kobe was arguably the best player on the Lakers during those inter-conference battles, as he efficiently filled up the stat sheet and dominated the game on both ends of the court. One of their more crucial series was their sweep over the first-seeded San Antonio Spurs in the West Finals, and in that series specifically, Kobe was almost certainly the MVP of that 4-game stretch. When the NBA Finals came, it was O'Neal who yet again dominated on a historic level, putting up completely insane numbers regardless of the fact that he was being defended by that season's Defensive Player of the Year, Dikembe Mutombo. Considering how Kobe was arguably the best in the West playoffs, it would be insanely inappropriate to say that he was carried this season, regardless of the fact that Shaq was the definitive Finals MVP against Philadelphia. In conclusion, Kobe was not carried in 2001. This brings us now to the final championship year of the Lakers three-peat, the 2001 to 2002 season. Shaq's regular season numbers indicated that he was still the premier player in Los Angeles, but Kobe put up solid all-around numbers of his own, as the Lakers finished the regular season with a 58-24 record. Once again, Kobe was pretty solid throughout the Western Conference playoffs, as they had a tough road through Portland, San Antonio, and Sacramento. He wasn't as efficient as the previous postseason, but he still produced greatly and made plenty of timely baskets that were the difference in many close games. In the 7th and deciding game against Sacramento, Kobe dropped 30 points, 10 assists, and 7 rebounds. Without his impact, Sacramento are the ones that win that series. Of course, the refs might have had something to do with that too, but that's a topic for another video. With all of that being said, Shaq consistently outproduced Kobe this postseason, and in the NBA Finals against the New Jersey Nets, the Diesel was the main reason the Lakers swept them so handily, as he deservedly won his 3rd straight Finals MVP. Shaq absolutely dominated, as he broke the NBA Finals record for the most points scored in a 4-game series. This completely overshadowed Kobe's terrific performance, as the Mamba scored roughly 27 points per game on insanely efficient shooting splits. Although Shaq deserved every Finals MVP he got, you can't deny Kobe's crucial impact when the games mattered the most. For this reason, the conclusion is that Kobe was not carried by Shaq in the 2002 season. Now let me make this extremely clear. As we reflect and evaluate the Lakers three-peat, the evidence is clear that Shaq was the best player during those championship runs, and frankly, it wasn't all that close. He was Batman and Kobe was Robin. Whoever argues otherwise either simply didn't watch or is just being an extremely biased Kobe fan. Kobe was between the ages of 20 to 22, while Shaq was in his late 20s and in the prime of his career. Considering where they were at in their careers, it's understandable that this is how the pecking order unfolded. Even with this being said, I think it's extremely disrespectful to Kobe's contribution to say that Shaq carried him. When I think of the word carried, I think of LeBron dragging an injury-laden Cavs team to the NBA Finals in 2018. I think of Kobe willing the Lakers to the playoffs in 2006 with guys like Smush Parker and Kwame Brown in the starting lineup. I think of Michael Jordan willing his team of mostly crackheads to the playoffs and dropping 63 points against the first-seeded Boston Celtics in 1986. Those are legitimate examples of superstars carrying their teams. Shaq and Kobe simultaneously steamrolling the league together as complementary superstars is far from the definition of a carry, even if Shaq was clearly the superior player. He's one of the greatest players of basketball history and is arguably the most dominant player to ever live. So making a video that asks the question, how good was Shaquille O'Neal really, may seem ridiculous when the answer seems so obvious. Really, really good. But as someone who followed the entirety of Shaq's career very closely, I can definitely say that there's some underappreciated aspects and some misconceptions about his game and legacy. Today, we're analyzing the career of Shaquille O'Neal as we attempt to gain a more thorough and educated perspective of his resume. It was no secret that Shaq was a highly coveted prospect heading into the NBA, as he was taken out of LSU with the first overall pick in the 1992 draft by the Orlando Magic. This was a very different version of the Diesel than the one that we would come to know in Los Angeles, as this younger version of Shaq was slimmer, quicker, more agile, and simply more athletic overall. In many ways, this version of Shaq strongly resembled a prime Giannis, as he had lean muscle and was capable of handling the ball and could even take it coast to coast if he wanted to. This wasn't incredibly common, as he was still a true center at his core, who relentlessly dominated the game in the paint. In his rookie season, he was 7 foot 1 inches tall and was hovering around 300 pounds and played in 81 of the 82 games, as he poured in averages of 23.4 points, 13.9 rebounds, and 3.5 blocks on 56.2% shooting. Due to his dominance, the Magic improved their record over the previous season by 20 wins, and he was immediately being recognized as one of the best centers in the entire league. Simply put, it was one of the all-time great debut seasons of NBA history, as the 20-year-old was one of the most NBA-ready rookies that the league has ever seen. The following season, they drafted the incredibly gifted and dynamic point guard Penny Hardaway, and this is when Shaq's Magic went from simply a young team with potential to a young contender in the Eastern Conference. At this point, Shaq was only 21 years old, as he led the Magic to a 50-32 record as a sophomore, as he put up 29.3 points, 13.2 rebounds, and 2.9 blocks on 59.9% shooting. He led the league in overall field goal percentage, he was second in scoring, second in rebounding, and fourth in blocks. Again, he achieved all of this in his second season, while going up against the strongest era of the big man that the league has ever seen. In total, Shaq spent 4 years in Orlando and was close to winning the championship on multiple occasions. The first instance was in the 1995 NBA Finals, where his Magic was famously swept by the more experienced Houston Rockets. But what many people don't realize is that despite being beat by Hakeem, Shaq had a dominant series and was certainly blameless in their defeat. The other instance was in 1996, where his 60-win Magic were eliminated in the Eastern Conference Finals by the 72-10 Chicago Bulls. Then in the summer of 1996, Shaq stunned the city of Orlando by leaving for Los Angeles, where the real meat of his legacy would begin. During this era is when Shaq started to reach his peak dominating form. He did put on a significant amount of weight, but in the early years with the Lakers, much of that was sheer muscle mass. Yes, this did decrease some of the speed and agility of the Diesel, but that doesn't mean that Shaq's only skill set in Los Angeles was simply overpowering people. That is a common narrative about his prime, that Shaq simply scored in bunches by bullying the opponent. And although he did certainly manhandle the opposition, it's not quite his entire skill set. One thing that's rarely mentioned is that Shaq had extremely underrated footwork. Sure, he wasn't Akeem Olajuwon or Kevin McHale, but Shaq often took advantage of every step and intelligently utilized his pivot foot to get himself into the best positions for scoring. He also had an extremely reliable jump hook shot for the instances where he wasn't close enough to simply dunk the basketball over the defender. Another specific quality that is rarely spoken of was Shaq's willingness to punish the opponent physically regardless of his God-given size. Kobe Bryant spoke about this rare mentality in an interview several years ago.
For sure. I mean, this guy was a force like I have never seen. I mean, it was crazy. You know, a guy at that size, generally guys at that size are a little timid and they don't want to be tall. They don't want to be big. Man, this dude he did not care. He was mean. He was nasty. He was competitive. He was vindictive.
For 3 straight years under Del Harris, Shaq and the Lakers looked like a promising team, ready to compete for the NBA championship. But it wasn't until his first year with Phil Jackson that he would finally break through and reach the mountaintop. It also happened to be the greatest season of Shaq's career on an individual level, as he won his lone MVP in the 1999-2000 season, with averages of 29.7 points, 13.6 rebounds, 3.8 assists, and 3 blocks on 57.4% shooting. That season, he was first in scoring, second in rebounds, first in assists among centers, third in blocks, and first in field goal percentage. One thing that people often overlook is the fact that Shaq finished second overall in the Defensive Player of the Year voting behind only Alonzo Mourning. With this effort, he led his Lakers to a dominant 67-15 record and was rewarded with the MVP as a result. But in my opinion, he should have been the first unanimous MVP of NBA history. But he only received 120 of the 121 total votes, as the CNN reporter Fred Hickman voted for Allen Iverson instead, who clearly had an inferior season. Shaq would not only go on to win his first championship and his first Finals MVP, but he had arguably the greatest Finals MVP stretch of NBA history, challenged only by Michael Jordan's run from 1991 to 1993. There's an ongoing debate about whether or not Shaq carried Kobe during their 3 championship runs, and I certainly think it's disrespectful to Kobe to imply that a star of his caliber was carried. But I will say this. During that run, Shaq was the clear focal point of the Lakers' offense. The game plan was always to go through him, while the opponent's game plan was always about containing him. In other words, Shaq was the Batman to Kobe's Robin, both in terms of statistics and impact. Yes, Batman needed Robin to succeed, but let's not get it twisted. We know who was where in terms of the Lakers hierarchy. Of the 3 Finals MVPs, Shaq's most impressive was probably his second, as you consider how he did it against that season's Defensive Player of the Year, Dikembe Mutombo. If he, of all people, couldn't contain Shaq in the finals, then absolutely no one could have that season. After that final stretch, it was around the 2003 to 2004 season that Shaq's physical fitness began to decline as he put on a significant amount of weight, rumored to be around 350 pounds, which played a part in Kobe's frustration with Shaq that ultimately led to their split. At this point in his career, it was clear that Shaq was still the most dominant center in the league, but it was also apparent that his prime years were now behind him. After a disappointing finals exit in 2004, Lakers management decided that they were ready to build upon their younger star and traded Shaq to the Miami Heat. Although the Diesel had clearly lost a step, he still stood out enough to be a serious MVP candidate. Alongside of a rookie Dwayne Wade, Shaq and the Heat went on to win 59 games throughout the regular season, which was the best record in the Eastern Conference. Throughout the season, Shaq put up solid averages of 22.9 points, 10.4 rebounds, 2.7 assists, and 2.3 blocks on 60.1% shooting. He was so impactful that he barely placed second in the MVP race to Steve Nash, separated by only a total of 34 points. It's one of the more controversial MVPs of league history, seeing how Shaq bested Nash in nearly every major advanced stat, like win shares, player efficiency rating, value over replacement player, and blocks plus minus. They made it all the way to Game 7 of the East Finals before they were eliminated by the Detroit Pistons. The next year, the Heat would not only get their revenge on the Pistons, but on the league as a whole, as they defeated Detroit in the East Finals and eventually the Dallas Mavericks in the NBA Finals. It's no question that Wade was clearly the best player in those finals with his historic performance, but Shaq still efficiently chipped in as he earned his 4th and final ring. After this season specifically, Shaq's athleticism and production would begin to decline dramatically, as his career wrapped up as a journeyman, traveling from team to team seeking one last opportunity at another championship ring. Unfortunately, that additional opportunity in the finals would never come. Many have criticized Shaq for not having the greatest work ethic and have harped on the fact that Shaq didn't have the greatest longevity because he didn't always maintain his fitness. Famously, analysts like Shannon Sharpe and even teammates like Kobe Bryant have perpetuated this narrative by being very harsh on O'Neal. The thing is, although I do believe there's some truth to it, I also believe that it's grossly exaggerated. Shaq played a total of 19 seasons in the NBA, which is an extremely high amount for a center, especially one of his size. On top of that, he was arguably the best center in the entire NBA for 14 straight seasons, and he had MVP votes in 14 of those 19 seasons while earning 15 All-Star selections. So honestly, I feel like people are nitpicking one of the greatest players of all time when they're criticizing Shaq's perceived lack of longevity. With an elite work ethic, at most, I think he gets another year or two of elite production, but that's it. When we look at his resume as a whole, Shaq made 14 All-NBA teams, 3 All-Defense teams, and was a 4-time NBA champion, a 3-time Finals MVP, the 2000 League MVP, and was the 1993 Rookie of the Year. He also led the league in field goal percentage 10 times, which is the most in NBA history, ahead of Wilt Chamberlain, and is double the amount of third place, which is DeAndre Jordan. He wasn't without any weakness though, as the Diesel famously struggled from the free throw line, shooting a career percentage of 52.7%. Shaq has always claimed that he made his free throws when his team needed them the most. But after much research, the statistics basically indicate that he shot roughly the same percentage regardless of what part of the game he was in. Rick Barry is among the people who offered to aid Shaquille O'Neal with his free throws, which would have involved Shaq learning an underhanded form for his foul shooting. Shaq boldly declined this offer simply for the reason that it looked ridiculous. It's unfortunate that Shaq was so prideful in this area, because if Shaq had actually been a great free throw shooter, then he likely would have finished his career as the consensus greatest player of all time. Regardless, all in all, Shaq is one of the greatest players of all time, and along with Michael Jordan and Bill Russell, he's easily one of the greatest NBA Finals performers that the league has ever seen. Draymond Green famously made comments that he could give Shaq some problems, and now, because of his ridiculous delusion, I regularly see posts like this circling around social media. Sure, there is the narrative that Dennis Rodman and Ben Wallace put the clamps on Shaquille O'Neal, but that's just not true. Here are Shaq's career averages, and these are his career averages specifically against Dennis Rodman and Ben Wallace. At best, they did a decent job of containing Shaq, but absolutely no one can put the clamps on the Diesel. In all of my years of watching the game of basketball, I've never seen anyone impose his will to the degree that Shaq did. Every once in a while, it does irk me when people refer to Shaq as the most dominant player to ever play, because newsflash, Wilt Chamberlain once existed. With that being said, I kinda get it from a certain perspective. Shaq's dominance wasn't just about scoring points over the opposing player, but it was his unparalleled bullying nature. The 7-foot 1-inch, 325-pound Diesel was not a gentle giant in the slightest. He would use his strength, his shoulders, his elbows, and his sheer ruthlessness to dunk over the top of opposing centers. He made real-life giants look like junior varsity players by how he overpowered them. Occasionally, they adapted and tried to flop, but Shaq would learn from that and sometimes held back on the punishing contact while the defender flailed backwards, and had an uncontested dunk at the rim as a result. Listen, there have been other all-time great scoring bigs in NBA history, like Kareem, Hakeem, and Wilt, but none of them did it like Shaq did, as each of those other centers relied more on the finesse aspect of their game. During his prime, everyone knew the ball was getting dumped down to Shaq repeatedly. General managers knew it, and they built teams with the intent to slow him down. The opposing head coach knew it, and he game planned for it. The analysts in the pregame knew it and discussed it at length. The millions of people watching the telecast knew it, the 20,000 people in the stadium knew it, and the centers assigned to guard him knew it as well. Yet when tip-off came, there was still nothing they could do to stop it. That should be the very definition of dominance. If you want to witness this yourself, I would watch the first 2 games of the 2000 NBA Finals. Pay attention to how Shaq imposes his will. Pay attention to how he controls the pace of the game, and even controls the opposing team's rotations. Watch how he gets numerous players in foul trouble, and how he simultaneously opens up the floor for his three-point shooting teammates. He was truly one of a kind, and honestly, I don't think I'll see a player like him ever again. For me, the most underappreciated aspect of Shaq's game was his stellar footwork. There was a couple different choices for me to choose from. Shaq's passing ability and vision is something that people rarely talk about, but I gotta give the slight edge to his footwork. A lot of people view Shaq as the big, dominating figure who mindlessly bullied players in the paint. Although Shaq certainly imposed his will on smaller defenders, he didn't do it without his fair share of skill. Referees are on the lookout for traveling violations, but it always felt like they kept an eye on Shaq even more critically. Opposing centers often had few ways to defend the Diesel. He was the most dominant force in modern basketball history thanks mostly to his brute strength and size. But you don't get as dominant as he was without skill and knowing how to execute. In 1995, Shaq and Hakeem were at the center of the debate for the title of the best big man in the entire NBA. But Hakeem basically squashed that debate as soon as the NBA Finals were played in June. It was between Shaq's Magic and Hakeem's Rockets, but it was hardly a contest as the Rockets swept the Magic in just 4 games. Although both centers played extremely well and each put up strong numbers, it was clear which big man had firmly established himself as the man on top of the basketball world. This narrative didn't sit very well with the Diesel, who said he believed that he was still the better big man. So Shaq sent this letter to Olajuwon challenging him to a game of one-on-one to settle the score once and for all. Hakeem actually accepted the challenge, and hype began to swirl around the basketball world. This was such an anticipated and expected event that there was even television ads to promote the showdown. Unfortunately, Hakeem Olajuwon injured his back leading up to the event, and the matchup had to be canceled just a day before they were set to square off. Shaq was later asked in an interview if he thought Hakeem was just looking for an excuse to back out, but Shaq had too much respect for the dream and said that he didn't believe that was the case. Let me know in the comments who you think would have won in that one-on-one scenario. So what were the 10 greatest Finals MVP performances of NBA history? Well, this list is somewhat subjective, but I think I've put together a pretty good one. First, let me establish a couple details about this list. The Finals MVP award was introduced to the league in 1969, which unfortunately means that a Wilt Chamberlain performance and all of Bill Russell's performances will not be considered for the list. Yeah, it sucks, but I want to stick to the official MVP awards, and if you would like to see these legends get some love, there's plenty of other videos that do that on this channel. Also consider the fact that these are the greatest Finals performances from the greatest players of all time. So just because a specific performance doesn't make the top 10 list doesn't mean that I didn't think it was great, or even that I didn't think it was amazing. It just means that the bar is set absurdly high. So with that being said, here's the list of honorable mentions. Got it? Great. Now that I've emotionally triggered some of you, let's continue. Number 10, Dwayne Wade in 2006. It was a finals matchup between the Dallas Mavericks and Wade's Miami Heat. After Dallas took a commanding 2-0 lead in the series, that's when the dynamic 24-year-old took his game to the next level and dominated the series from that point on, in what was described at the time as a Jordan-esque type performance. On the series, Wade averaged 34.7 points, 7.8 rebounds, 3.8 assists, and 2.7 steals on 46.8% shooting. 3 out of the final 4 games of the series were decided by only one basket, and Wade's clutch gene was certainly the deciding factor in the series. Now you could argue that Wade should be higher on the list, but there's a lot of controversy tied to this series in terms of its refereeing, and this series from Wade holds the finals record for the most free throw attempts in a 6-game series with 97. Shaquille O'Neal in 2000 is in second place with 93 free throws, and remember, he had the hack-a-Shaq strategy helping him get that high. In Game 5 alone, Wade shot 25 free throws, while the entire Dallas Mavericks team shot 25 free throws as well. So again, it's an incredibly impressive performance from Wade, but due to the questions of its legitimacy, I'm afraid I can't rank him any higher than the 10th spot. Number 9, Magic Johnson in 1987. The 1987 Finals was the third and final matchup of that decade between the Lakers and Celtics. Offensively, Magic dominated this series in as many ways as possible, as it was one of the strongest dual-threat series the league has ever seen in terms of his scoring and facilitating. He was also ridiculously efficient, as he shot 54.1% from the field and 96% from the free throw line. On the series, he put up 26.2 points, 13 assists, 8 rebounds, and 2.3 steals. Despite his pass-first tendencies, he actually led all players in scoring in 3 out of the 6 games that series. He also had the iconic game-winning baby skyhook in the crucial 4th game in Boston Garden. Magic ultimately led his Showtime Lakers to win the series in 6 games, and it was such a dominant performance that even Larry Bird basically conceded that Magic was the best player in the game at that point. Number 8, Shaquille O'Neal in 2002. It was the 3rd championship of the Shaq and Kobe three-peat, and New Jersey basically never stood a chance, and the biggest reason for that was the fact that they had absolutely no answer for the Diesel, as he dominated with 36.3 points, 12.3 rebounds, 3.8 assists, and 2.8 blocks on 59.5% shooting. As a result of his presence and power in the paint, all of New Jersey's bigs were consistently in foul trouble, and to top it off, Shaq hit 45 of his 68 free throw attempts during the series, which is 66.2%. That's certainly not elite, but by Shaquille O'Neal standards, that's fantastic. His 145 points over the course of the series is the most points ever scored in an NBA Finals sweep. Number 7, Michael Jordan in 1991. This was the highly anticipated matchup between Magic and Michael, the Los Angeles Lakers and the Chicago Bulls. The Lakers took the first game, but after that point, Jordan began to take control, and the Bulls never looked back, winning the next 4 games straight. At one crucial stretch in Game 2, Jordan hit 13 straight field goals without a miss, and finished the game with 33, 13, and 7 on a ridiculous 83% shooting. On the series as a whole, he averaged 31.2 points, 11.4 assists, 6.6 rebounds, 2.8 steals, and 1.4 blocks on 55.8% shooting. What's incredible is how he destroyed the competition at different points with his scoring and then with his facilitating, as Jordan averaged only one less assist than Magic did during the series, while being more efficient and outscoring him by nearly 13 points per game. It's worth mentioning that Jordan also hit the most crucial shot of the series, where he made this game-tying basket, which forced Game 3 to overtime, where they eventually prevailed. Number 6. Hakeem Olajuwon in 1995. In what was expected to be a colossal battle with Shaquille O'Neal and the Orlando Magic, Hakeem proved why he was the best and most skilled big man in the game, as he had a tremendous impact on almost every aspect of the game. On the series, he put up 32.8 points, 11.5 rebounds, 5.5 assists, 2 steals, and 2 blocks on 48.3% shooting. The Dream led his Rockets to sweep the Orlando Magic, and he led all players in scoring in each of the 4 games. Considering the fact that they were only the 6th seed, this was one of the more improbable champions of NBA history, but it also speaks volumes about Olajuwon's clutch gene in the postseason. Number 5. Tim Duncan in 2003. It was a finals matchup between Tim Duncan's Spurs and the New Jersey Nets. Many people didn't witness this remarkable performance, as the 2003 championship was one of the least viewed NBA finals of league history. But those who did see it fortunately got to see the great Tim Duncan at his very best. In this series, he put up a monstrous 24.2 points, 17 rebounds, 5.3 assists, and 5.3 blocks on 49.5% shooting. The Nets had no answer for him anywhere on the court, as he started off the series in Game 1 with 32 points, 20 rebounds, 6 assists, and 7 blocks in a 12-point victory. But the way he closed out the series was arguably even more impressive. In the championship-clinching 6th game, he had 21 points, 20 rebounds, 10 assists, and 8 blocks, nearly getting the historic quadruple-double. But there's actually some controversy tied to this game, as many people believe that 2 more blocked shots should have gone to Duncan. Only 4 players in league history have ever achieved the quadruple-double, and no one has done it in the playoffs. But if these 2 blocks had counted toward Tim Duncan's total, then this would have been a quadruple-double on the game's biggest stage and in the final game of the season. That's legendary stuff, to say the least. Number 4. Shaquille O'Neal in 2001. It was the second of the Lakers' 3 straight championships, and Shaq was his usual dominant self on both ends of the court. He absolutely destroyed the Philadelphia Bigs with 33 points, 15.8 rebounds, 4.8 assists, and 3.4 blocks on 57.3% shooting. Shaq bullying the opponent in the paint and putting up these numbers over a 5-game series is impressive enough as is, but what makes it even more astonishing is how he did this up against that season's Defensive Player of the Year, Dikembe Mutombo, and he was still unstoppable and wasn't even contained in the slightest. On the other end, the 76ers were struggling to score in the paint, as Shaq's contested shots and his 3.4 blocks was his personal best in the finals. Number 3. LeBron James in 2016. It's hard to overstate how incredible this finals performance was from the King. A comeback from a 3-1 deficit, making one of the most iconic defensive plays of all time in the closing moments, to defeat the greatest regular season team ever, the 73-9 Warriors, while delivering the first and only championship in Cleveland Cavaliers history. Over the course of that 7-game series, he put up 29.7 points, 11.3 rebounds, 8.9 assists, 2.6 steals, and 2.3 blocks on 49.4% shooting. This is the only time in NBA Finals history where a player has led both teams in all 5 major stat categories. Offensively, defensively, and in the clutch situations, this was a legacy-defining moment for LeBron. Number 2. Michael Jordan in 1993. It was a matchup against Charles Barkley and the Phoenix Suns, where the Bulls secured their 3rd straight championship in 6 games, and Jordan was arguably never better than he was in these finals. To his credit, Barkley had an incredible series of his own, but it hardly mattered because Jordan was simply on another level. On the series, he put up 41 points, 8.5 rebounds, 6.3 assists, and 1.7 steals on 50.8% shooting. He led all 6 games in scoring, he scored over 40 points in 4 straight games, including a 55-point performance in a close Game 4 victory, and his 41 points per game is the highest average of NBA Finals history. Dan Marley of the Phoenix Suns was a strong 6'6" wing who was on the NBA's second all-defense team that season, which makes him the second best defender at his position this season. But the reality is, Michael Jordan made him look like a bad defender because of how brutally he dominated him. If Jordan had just a pretty good series, then there's a good chance that the Bulls would have lost. But because he had what some consider the greatest finals performance of all time, Chicago was able to close it out in 6 games. Number 1. Shaquille O'Neal in 2000. Every once in a while, I go back and I watch this series, and it leaves me in awe each time, especially the first 2 games. In my opinion, no player has ever had a greater impact and influence on a final series than Shaq did in 2000. Over the 6 games, he averaged 38 points, 16.7 rebounds, 2.3 assists, and 2.7 blocks on 61.1% shooting. He led all 6 games in scoring, he led 5 out of the 6 games in rebounding, and he led 5 out of the 6 games in blocked shots. The Lakers' game plan was obvious heading into the series, as they ran the offense almost completely through the diesel, and yet Indiana still couldn't slow him down, regardless of Rick Smits even having several inches on Shaq. He controlled the momentum of the game, its tempo, its physicality, and even seemingly the spirits of the opponent, as Indiana appeared demoralized at times during the opening games of Shaq's 40-point and 20-rebound performances. Between the 12 Pacers on the roster, they had a total of 159 personal fouls over the course of the 6 games, and of the 5 players who spent time guarding Shaq, they counted for 102 of those fouls. As a result, Shaq completely disrupted their rotations, as there was almost no aspect of the game where his influence couldn't be seen on the court. Kobe had his iconic moment in Game 4, where he sealed the game after Shaq fouled out. But other than that instance, Kobe had a terrible series, averaging only 15 points on 36.7% shooting. The biggest help that Shaq had was all the shooters he freed up by drawing the extra attention, by having the defense collapse upon him. So in a sense, Shaq even deserves some credit for their success as well. When you consider production and overall positive impact on the game, 2000 Shaq is my choice for the greatest finals MVP of all time.
When we talk about the biggest trade steals in NBA history, what are some of the trades that come to mind? A few examples would be a rookie Kobe Bryant to the Lakers for Vlade Divac, a young James Harden to the Rockets for mediocre pieces, or Boston basically taking all of Brooklyn's future picks for an aging Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce. The list goes on. But one of the trade steals I see so rarely mentioned was Shaquille O'Neal traded from the Lakers to the Miami Heat in 2004. It's probably because at first glance, a lot of people don't think this trade was actually a steal at all, or all that lopsided. To break down the trade specifically, the Miami Heat received Shaquille O'Neal. The Lakers received Lamar Odom, Brian Grant, Caron Butler, and Miami's future first-round pick. Lamar Odom was the only player in this trade that eventually contributed to the Lakers' championships in 2009 and 2010. Brian Grant was a 6'9" center who was coming off of a season that he averaged only 8 points and 6 rebounds in 30 minutes per game. Grant went on to play only one season with the Lakers in which he averaged nearly a whopping 4 points and 4 rebounds. Caron Butler was coming off of a season where he averaged only 9 points on less than 40% shooting. Caron also only spent 1 year with the Lakers, and although Caron Butler eventually developed into a good player, he wasn't one at the time of the trade, and wasn't with the Lakers long enough to make any real impact. The Lakers did receive Miami's first-round draft pick, but how valuable is that future first-round pick going to be when you just gave that team Shaquille O'Neal, who now plays in a weaker Eastern Conference? Miami was obviously going to make deep playoff runs after this trade, meaning that the Miami pick that now belonged to the Lakers was essentially just a hopeful late-round shot in the dark. The pick eventually turned into the 26th pick in the draft, which the Lakers used to select Jordan Farmar, who was at best a decent rotation player for the Lakers. In reality, Lamar Odom was the only solid piece the Lakers got in return for Shaq. I get that Odom was a quality player for LA and definitely had an impact for them, but let's put that into the correct perspective. For the Lakers, Lamar was a 6th man and a regular 6th Man of the Year candidate. If you had to trade away a still transcendent and dominant Shaquille O'Neal in a league where big men were often the best players on championship teams, who was still an elite rim protector defensively, averaging over 20 points and 12 boards, who had championship experience and was a recent 3-time Finals MVP, who was the best player on last year's Finals and only barely into his 30s, and the best piece you got in return is a 6th Man of the Year candidate? How many of you would take that deal? Honestly. It wasn't until Andrew Bynum was drafted and Pau Gasol was acquired in a trade from Memphis that the Lakers actually became contenders again. Both of these moves had nothing to do with the Shaq trade. The Lakers made these moves in spite of the terrible Shaq trade. This lopsided trade immediately catapulted Miami to be contenders in the Eastern Conference, while the Lakers went from a yearly playoff contender to a terrible 34-48 team, well short of the playoffs. I get the Lakers were ready to part ways with Shaq, and that Kobe was the younger player who the franchise chose to build around, but as a Lakers fan, the trade felt, dare I say, rushed? It felt like the Lakers had settled for at best an arguably decent offer rather than being patient and getting the best offer for the best center in the NBA. All the time, people talk about what if Shaq and Kobe stayed together, but there's another what if that almost never gets mentioned. What if Kobe actually got a solid return of talent from the Shaq trade? As a Lakers fan, it felt like a gut punch when Shaq was traded for simply decent pieces because the writing was on the wall. Despite being in Kobe's prime, Kobe wasn't going to be competing for championships in the near future. The only part of the trade that excited me as a fan was the opportunity to see what Kobe could do without Shaq, and with mostly a bunch of scrubs on his team. At this point, we had already seen Kobe score over 50 points in only 3 quarters and have a 9-game 40-point streak with Shaq. The thought was interesting to see what Kobe could do without Shaq demanding the ball and with Kobe literally having to carry the offense. And we all know what happened. 62 in 3 quarters, 35 points per game, 50 points in 4 straight games, and of course the 81-point game. As amazing as it was to see these incredible displays of offense, I can't help but think if the Lakers had played their cards right, they would have been able to compete for championships during Kobe's best years of his career. Regardless, this is how the story unfolded. Kobe spent his best years with below-average teammates before the arrival of Gasol revived the team, and Shaq and Wade won their legendary championship together. I really wish we could see the other trade offers the Lakers could have received for Shaq if they had waited to field more offers.
In this new Ultimate Team series, I make the best team I believe possible, picking players from all eras of NBA history. It isn't just about how talented the teams are, but I'm also trying to build teams that would gel and execute well together. Today, we're looking at the Ultimate Lakers team. Before I get started, here are the rules you need to know. To build each franchise's ultimate team, I will be picking a starting 5, a second unit representing each position, and then 3 additional rotation players at any position I choose. In total, there will be 13 roster spots. It's worth mentioning that I will not simply be building these teams based on how talented each player is, but I'll also be factoring in how well these players would do together as teammates. So without further ado, let's get into it. Starting at the point guard position is the face of Showtime, Magic Johnson. To many, and probably to most people, Magic is viewed as the greatest point guard of all time. One thing about this 6'9" floor general is that he really liked to push the tempo. The Showtime Lakers offense was ridiculously fast, and during his prime, he had guys who were solid at running in transition alongside of him. But especially on this Ultimate squad, they'll be even better on the fast break. Magic's best individual season was probably in 1987, while he was named the league MVP while averaging 24 points, 12 assists, and 6 rebounds on 52% shooting from the field. At the end of the day, there was basically no doubt on who was getting this starting nod. Starting at the shooting guard spot is the one known as the Black Mamba, Kobe Bryant. What's interesting is that Kobe never really played with a top-tier point guard in Los Angeles. Sure, Steve Nash was there for a bit, but that was long after Nash's prime. With Magic running the floor, Kobe will have to learn to play off ball, which will make this more like his time on the Olympic squads than anything else. Kobe ensures that this ultimate team will have a late game closer, a consistent flow of offense, and an elite perimeter defender. At his best in the 05-06 season, the Mamba averaged a ridiculous 35 points while being first team all-defense. To this day, that is the highest scoring average while being first team all-defense. Starting at small forward is the still active legend LeBron James. Throughout the vast majority of his career in Los Angeles, LeBron has started at the point guard spot. But in this case, he'll have to make room for Magic and return to his more traditional position. This should be no issue for LeBron though, as he's one of the greatest transition players that the game has ever seen. Magic used to be dishing the ball to a streaking James Worthy at the small forward spot, and as effective as that was, a streaking LeBron will be even scarier. At his Los Angeles best in 2020, James averaged 25 points, 10 assists, and 8 rebounds on 49% shooting from the field. With Magic and LeBron on the floor simultaneously, there will never be a time where the open man goes unnoticed. Starting at power forward is the former all-time leading scorer Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He's always played at the center position, so starting the 7-2 captain at the 4 may seem crazy to some, but I actually think it makes perfect sense when you think about the way this team operates. For one, Kareem was especially great at running the floor with Magic, especially when he was younger in the early 80s. Also, Kareem's bread and butter is not to score from directly under the basket, but it's actually from the post, as he had the most indefensible shot of all time, the sky hook. At 7-2 with that shot, opposing power forwards will be begging for mercy. In 1981, Kareem put up 26 points, 10 rebounds, 3 assists, and 3 blocks on 57% shooting from the field. Starting at the center position is the Diesel Shaquille O'Neal. In LA is where Shaq was at his absolute peak form, as he had the perfect combination of power and athleticism. With Kareem in the post and with Kobe and LeBron on the wings, Shaq will experience the most single-man coverage that he's ever had in his life, and due to this, he'll almost certainly be shooting a career-high percentage in the paint. Quite frankly, that point about single-man coverage is probably applicable to every player in this starting unit, and not just Shaq. During his nearly unanimous MVP run in 2000, Shaq averaged roughly 30 points, 14 rebounds, 4 assists, and 3 blocks on a league-leading 57% shooting from the field. When you look at this starting unit of Magic, Kobe, LeBron, Kareem, and Shaq, some modern basketball fans might complain about the lack of elite three-point shooting. But honestly, I'm not sure how much that really matters if the starting unit is shooting 60% from 2-point range basically every night. Now on to the second unit, which is definitely strong enough to beat most starting units. The backup point guard is the logo himself, Jerry West. Many people debate whether West should be considered as a 1 or a 2. But given the fact that he was the starting point guard during their dominant 1972 championship run, that's where I'm placing him. Although the three-point shot did not exist yet in the NBA during his career, West was a guy who certainly could have been lethal from that distance. Not only is he known as Mr. Clutch for his big game performances, but he was also one of the most underrated defenders of all time. In 1972, he averaged about 26 points, a league-leading 9.7 assists, and 4 rebounds on 48% shooting from the field. The backup shooting guard is the 6'1" Hall of Famer Gil Goodrich. Without question, he's one of the most underappreciated players in the franchise's history, as he was a legitimate superstar in his own right, yet almost never gets any shine in this modern day. He was a solid pull-up shooter and was often the recipient of Jerry West's numerous assists. In their 1972 championship run, he averaged 26 points, 4 assists, and 4 rebounds on an elite 49% shooting. He may be battling for minutes with all of these incredible guards, but he'll never be a bad option when he's on the court. The backup small forward is the dominant Elgin Baylor. To this day, he holds the NBA record for the most points scored in a finals game with a total of 61, which basically sums up just how explosive he was offensively. Beyond that, he was the greatest rebounder ever for a player his size, as he intelligently used his strength and IQ to be among the league leaders on a yearly basis. In the 1961 season, Baylor put up an insane average of roughly 35 points, 20 rebounds, and 5 assists on 43% shooting from the field. He'll be right at home when he's on the court with West, as they earn the nicknames Mr. Inside and Mr. Outside. The backup power forward is the versatile two-way threat Anthony Davis. As a superstar off the bench, AD will be able to stay healthy more often, and will even be able to focus more of his energy on the defensive end of the floor. With the incredible traditional centers on this squad, he'll have even less attention on him when he looks to go to work from the post. His LA best was in 2020, where he put up 26 points, 9 rebounds, 3 assists, and 2 blocks on 50% shooting from the field. The backup center is arguably the most dominant player in the history of the game, Wilt Chamberlain. Maybe the biggest concern for this team will be morale and chemistry, because imagine trying to convince an elite Wilt Chamberlain to come off the bench. Regardless, that will be his responsibility on this ultimate squad. By the time he was in Los Angeles, Wilt had taken a step back as a scorer, yet he was still a terrifying rim protector and an elite passer from the post and in outlet situations. In 1969, he averaged 20 points, a league-leading 21 rebounds, and 4 assists on 58% shooting from the field. I can only imagine the mismatches that Wilt will be taking advantage of as he faces backup centers on a nightly basis. Now on to the 3 rotation players. The first is the man known as Big Game James Worthy. This 6'9" small forward had one of the quickest first steps in basketball history, and as I mentioned before, he was extremely dangerous in transition. You would be wrong to assume that he was simply a role player, as Worthy was a legitimate star who could take over on his own. Case in point, he was the 1988 Finals MVP with one of the greatest Game 7 performances of all time. During his 7 straight All-Star seasons in LA, he averaged about 20 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 assists on 53% shooting from the field. The second rotation player is another Hall of Famer, Pau Gasol. This 7-foot center / power forward helped Kobe Bryant win back-to-back championships in 2009 and 2010. He did it with his finesse-style offense and with his unselfish team play. In 2010, Pau put up 18 points, 11 rebounds, and 3 assists on 54% shooting from the field. He's yet another player on this absurdly stacked roster that will struggle to get a tremendous amount of minutes, but when he's in, he'll be a safe bet to produce. The third rotation player and the last spot on this roster goes to the role-playing shooting guard Michael Cooper. There is certainly more talented and more accomplished players who could have taken this spot, but with these last few bench spots, I'm looking for guys who can fill needed roles. There is enough superstar power on this roster, and what's needed is some 3-point shooting and defense. This 6'7" wing just happens to be one of the greatest 3-and-D players of all time. He made an insane 8 all-defense teams in Los Angeles, and for a while, he was a 3-point record holder in the NBA Finals. He was also insanely athletic, and was with all 5 championship teams in the 80s, proving that he has the playoff experience to belong. So here's a final look at the complete roster of this ultimate Lakers team. Simply put, there is no weaknesses on this squad, as they are absurdly overpowered. The different rotations and lineups that could dominate are pretty much endless. When we eventually do the 2K simulation of all the teams, this team will likely be the favorite heading in. They'll probably still find a way to lose in the first round just because 2K is ridiculous like that. But in a more realistic scenario, it's hard to envision this team ever being stopped. My one major frustration with this roster is the fact that George Mikan isn't on it, but I honestly don't see what impact he could have had when there's so many great bigs ahead of him. which is why I ultimately went with Cooper for the final spot. Here is my list of honorable mentions. Should any of these players have made the roster instead? I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comment section below.
The 2000 to 2001 Los Angeles Lakers, famously known for one of the most dominant postseason runs in sports history, led by one of the most dominant duos ever, a 29-year-old Shaquille O'Neal and a 22-year-old Kobe Bryant. This was the closest thing we ever saw to a prime Shaq and a prime Kobe on the same team. This was the biggest moment of overlap of the greatness of both players. Shaq was still at the height of his powers as Kobe was experiencing his breakout season as one of the NBA's leading scorers while continuing to be an elite defender. Additionally, this Lakers roster was arguably their deepest of any of their modern championship runs. More often than not, starting at the point guard position was the experienced veteran Ron Harper. He shot about 47% and chipped in just 7 points a game, but his experience and reliable defensive abilities often go overlooked. The Lakers didn't have a star point guard, but people often forget how deep they were at that position because backing up Harper was Derek Fisher and Brian Shaw. Fisher was 26 years old, and although Harper started more games, Derek chipped in with numbers of 11.5 points, 4.4 assists, and 2 steals on 41% shooting. Whenever the defense would collapse on Shaq, which was basically all the time, Fisher was one of those solid options for him to kick the ball out to, as Derek shot 40% from three-point range over the course of the regular season and shot a ridiculous 51.5% from three-point range during the playoffs. Fisher was one of those guys who did all the little things well, whether it be hustle for the loose ball, take a charge at a crucial moment of the game, or automatically knock down free throws from Rasheed Wallace's technical fouls. Fish was the kind of role player that any team would want when the games mattered most. Brian Shaw was a large 6'6" point guard / shooting guard. Sometimes he would back up Harper and Fish, but he would also come off the bench for Kobe as well. Shaw was another reliable option for Shaq to kick the ball out to, as he too upped his game in the playoffs, going from 31% three-point shooting in the regular season to 35% in the postseason. Shaw was also one of the best lob passers in the entire league. Kobe would sometimes be on the receiving end, but he was more known for his connections with Shaq. The alley-oop pass from Shaw to Shaq was coined the Shaw-Shaq Redemption, in reference to the movie The Shawshank Redemption, which is an all-time great movie, by the way. Kobe obviously started at the two-guard spot, and this was the beginning of him torching the league. He had improved his scoring average by 6 points from the previous season, as he averaged 28.5 points, 5.9 rebounds, and 5 assists on 46.4% shooting. He was also second-team All-Defense that year. Starting at the small forward position was the 6'7", 31-year-old Rick Fox. He was a solid contributor, putting in about 10 points, 4 rebounds, and 3 assists over the course of the season. Forgive me if I'm starting to sound repetitive at this point, but Fox was yet another reliable three-point shooter for the ball to be kicked out to, as he shot 39.3% from that distance. Starting at the power forward was the Lakers' big acquisition in the offseason, the 6'10" Horace Grant. Horace was 35 years old at this point, so he wasn't what he once was with the Bulls and Magic, but he still chipped in with about 8.5 points and 7 rebounds a game. He also helped Shaq significantly with the interior defense, which was huge, considering how strong the power forward position was in the Western Conference at that time. Everyone knows about the guy starting at center, the 7'1", 325-pound Shaquille O'Neal, the most dominant big man since Wilt Chamberlain. Shaq was coming off of his near-unanimous MVP season with almost identical numbers of 28.7 points, 12.7 rebounds, 3.7 assists, and 2.8 blocks on 57% shooting. There's not much that I could tell you about the Diesel that you don't already know, but simply put, in many ways, Shaq defined that era, especially in the Western Conference. All of the contending teams were focused on acquiring big bodies to throw at Shaq in order to challenge his physicality, and yet regardless, Shaq still dominated playing bully ball. Filling out the roster was the 6'9" power forward, who was one of the most clutch role players the game has ever seen, Robert Horry. And then you had Devin George, Tyronn Lue, Isaiah Ryder, Slava Medvedenko, and simply the greatest dancer of all time, Mark Madsen. Looking at the results of this group, we see that the Lakers finished with a 56-26 record, which was the second best in the league. They had the 21st ranked defense and the number 2 ranked offense that season. They beat teams by an average of 3.4 points over the course of the regular season. They historically dominated in the playoffs with a 15-1 record, although they did not have that season's MVP, who was Allen Iverson. A few of these things are the reasons the 2001 Lakers don't get more credit in the case for the GOAT team title. because a 56-26 record is significantly worse than most GOAT team candidates. Plus, their defense was in the bottom half of the league. And they weren't typically blowing teams out either, as their margin of victory was relatively pretty low. For example, the '86 Celtics, who I've already done a video on, had a margin of victory that was nearly 3 times that of the '01 Lakers. But to completely disregard the Lakers for these reasons could be something that's lacking a bit of context. The 2001 Lakers were coming off of a season where they had just won the championship. Watching most of that regular season, they often seemed complacent, and it appeared as if they were simply cruising through the regular season before they eventually turned up the intensity just in time for the playoffs. And man, did they turn it up. The Lakers won the final 8 games of the regular season heading into the playoffs. Combine that with their 15-1 postseason record, and the Lakers finished the most difficult time of the year, winning 23 out of 24 games. What was incredible about this team wasn't just the fact that they went 15-1 in the playoffs, but it was who they beat to go 15-1. This was at a time when the Western Conference was stacked with talent and powerful teams. They started their postseason run up against the 50-win Portland Trail Blazers, the same team that had pushed them to 7 games in the Western Conference Finals the previous season. They destroyed the Blazers, sweeping them in 3 games with an average margin of victory of 14.7 points. The second round was against their rival, the loaded 55-win Sacramento Kings. Well, despite the hype, the Lakers swept them too, winning by an average of 9.2 points. Shaq and Kobe's imprints were all over this series, as Shaq dropped 44 points and 21 rebounds in Game 1, and then 43 points and 20 rebounds in Game 2. Then it was Kobe's turn, as he dropped 36, 7, and 7 in Game 3, and 48 points and 16 rebounds in Game 4. Surely the San Antonio Spurs would give a greater challenge. This San Antonio squad was led by Tim Duncan, David Robinson, and Derek Anderson. They had finished the regular season with a 58-24 record, which was the best record in the entire league, even greater than the Lakers. On top of that, San Antonio had the best defense in the league as well. The Lakers were not supposed to sweep this team. But not only did they do that, but they absolutely demolished them with an average margin of victory of a whopping 22.2 points. Kobe was leading the way, averaging 33, 7, and 7 on 51% shooting. Iverson's iconic 48-point performance was good enough to steal Game 1 of the NBA Finals. But after that, it was business as usual for the Lakers, and this time it was Shaq leading the way, putting up 33 points and 16 rebounds on 57% shooting over the course of the finals. These were the averages of Shaq and Kobe over the course of the entire playoffs. You can argue who was Batman and who was Robin over these playoffs, but whoever was Robin probably put up the greatest playoff performance from a Robin in NBA history. After the season was over, everyone in the media was comparing this team to the '96 Bulls. Over time, people haven't made that comparison as much, since I think a lot of people have forgotten the context that shows just how great this team was. Ultimately, this Lakers squad had it all. 2 all-time great alphas, a collection of shooters who are surrounding stars that demand so much of the defensive attention, clutch performers with championship-level experience all over the roster, and arguably the greatest coach in NBA history. This Lakers unit would likely challenge any other all-time great team. So the question is, could any other historic team beat the 2001 Lakers in a 7-game series? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. Here's 8 rarely known facts about Kobe Bryant. Number 1, he claimed he could be the best point guard. In the 2012 to 2013 season, Kobe was 34 years old and was in his 17th season in the league. And this would be his last season as an MVP caliber player that we all remember famously ended with the Achilles tear. I've gone on in past videos about how incredibly impressive this season was, but one thing I haven't yet mentioned is about his small stretch of games where he played primarily as a facilitator. It was January in a 3-game home stretch against Utah, Oklahoma City, and New Orleans, and in those games he put up stat lines of 14 points, 14 assists, 9 rebounds, then 21 points, 14 assists, 9 rebounds, and then 14 points, 11 assists, and 8 rebounds. A more selective Kobe shot 59% from the field over that stretch, and the Lakers won all 3 games. In the post-game interview of the 3rd game, Kobe was asked many questions about his newfound love of facilitating, and Kobe gave credit to his childhood idol, Magic Johnson. When asked how he would do if he focused all of his energy on being a point guard for an entire season, Kobe responded with this.
What you think I'm gonna say? I wasn't gonna be the best.
Number 2. Kobe turned down a scoring crown. Heading into the Lakers' final regular season game of the 2011-2012 season, a 23-year-old Kevin Durant and a 33-year-old Kobe Bryant were sitting atop the rest of the league as scorers. Durant was averaging 28 points per game and Kobe was averaging 27.8. He would need just 38 points to take the scoring championship away from Durant. The Thunder had no regular season games left to be played, but it appeared that Kobe had one more opportunity to take the crown as his own. It would be in Sacramento against a terrible Kings team that Kobe averaged 33.5 points against that season. So if he really went for it, 38 points is theoretically something that the Mamba could have easily accomplished. The thing is, the Lakers were already locked into the 3rd seed of the Western Conference, and the difference between a win and loss in Sacramento was completely meaningless from a team perspective. When asked about the scoring title, Kobe said, "It's not very important. San Antonio was playing me single coverage yesterday. If it was important to me, I would have gone for 50 yesterday." So when given the opportunity, Kobe sat out the game against Sacramento to instead rest and prepare himself for the playoffs. People have said this to me before, but if anyone ever says Kobe's desires for stats and personal accolades were stronger than his desire to win, then please point them to this game. Number 3. At a time, Kobe was planning to join forces with Michael Jordan on the Wizards. During his 2 seasons playing with the Wizards, there were ongoing private conversations between Kobe and Jordan. Kobe was frustrated playing alongside of Shaquille O'Neal for many well-documented reasons that I'm sure most of you are aware of. Kobe's free agency was approaching in 2004, and that would be the time for him to head to Washington. But Jordan was no longer playing at that point, and it was assumed by pretty much everyone, including Jordan, that when he was done playing with the Wizards, he would assume his role as the team's president of basketball operations. But that's when the plan fell through, as the Wizards owner Abe Pollin fired Jordan in May of 2003. When asked if the rumor was true that he planned on joining Jordan in Washington, Kobe said, "That's true. I've always been big on having mentors. Being around guys who have done it before and done it at a high level. I always tried to pick their brains and absorb knowledge. Obviously, being in that situation, it would have helped having to be around him every day and so on. We would have put together a great team, and we would have won championships." Looking back on it, this is definitely one of the more interesting what-if scenarios for the career of both Kobe and Jordan. Number 4. Kobe was actually booed at Staples Center. This one requires a little bit more context. The Laker fans were in a different headspace in the mid-2000s. After the departure of Shaquille O'Neal, Kobe had a terrible supporting cast, and in the next several seasons, Kobe was either missing the playoffs or getting bounced in the first round, despite the fact that he was leading the league in scoring. Many of us Laker fans were beginning to question if Kobe could win a championship for us without Shaq, and Kobe was starting to doubt as well. After being eliminated from the playoffs for the 2nd straight year to the Phoenix Suns, the Mamba took his frustration to the media and publicly demanded a trade in the summer of 2007. This started a whirlwind of rumors and a stressful offseason for Laker fans. At any moment, we were expecting news to break that Kobe had been traded to the Bulls like he wanted. Despite Kobe's demands, management refused to trade Kobe. This brought us to October 30th, 2007. It was opening night against the Houston Rockets, and Kobe gets booed by the Staples Center crowd at his introduction and in his first few possessions when touching the basketball. It was a surreal sight considering everything Kobe had already accomplished for that crowd. Kobe then had a legendary performance in a thrilling game and dropped 45 points. The funniest part was that in just 2 hours after the crowd was booing him, that same Laker crowd was then chanting his name at the free throw line.
Half minute to play here in the 3rd quarter.
Lakers ultimately lose the game by 2 points. They land Pau Gasol in a trade a couple months later, and the rest is history. Number 5. Kobe tried out for the Celtics and was nearly drafted by them. Kobe was a young and exciting prospect heading into the NBA, but as a 17-year-old, the expectations of him were far from being as high as several other rookies coming into the league. The Celtics then asked a high school version of Kobe to come in for a workout. As a lifelong Lakers fan, Kobe certainly wasn't comfortable sporting the Celtic green, and said years later that he really didn't want to put the uniform on. Unsurprisingly, everyone in the Celtics organization was impressed with his skills and abilities. The head coach of the Celtics, M.L. Carr, said, "I'm telling you, he put on a shooting exhibition the way he stroked the ball." Carr was also impressed with Kobe's knowledge and appreciation for Celtics history, saying, "He said all the right things. He sounded like a Celtic." Celtics general manager at the time, Jan Volk, said, "If you closed your eyes and thought a little bit, you might have thought you were watching Michael Jordan."
With praise like that, it would seem like a foregone conclusion that the Celtics would draft Kobe. But with that being said, the Boston Celtics own the 9th overall pick in the draft, which they almost certainly would have used to take Kobe. But the 96 draft was loaded with talent, and there were 6 players with lots of hype surrounding them, known as the Super Six of 96. They were Allen Iverson, Marcus Camby, Ray Allen, Antoine Walker, Shareef Abdul-Rahim, and Stephon Marbury. It was assumed that if you had a top 6 pick, you couldn't pass these guys up. The Celtics managed to pull off a trade to move up from the 9th pick to the 6th pick, which they then used to select the 6'8" Antoine Walker. A great player, but he isn't Kobe, and the Celtics involved are still regretting that decision to this day. When asked how Kobe would have responded if the Celtics had drafted him, he said, "I would have tried to carry on Bird's legacy. Absolutely. I would have done it with a tremendous amount of pride and honor." Number 6. Kobe got MVP chance in Boston. Not much backstory to this one. It seemed as if it was just a regular night in Boston in early 2007. Well, Kobe was doing Kobe things that evening, hitting some of the most absurd, difficult, and highlight-worthy shots, I would say, of his career, but these were pretty standard in his prime, let's be honest. The game is getting out of hand for the Celtics, and it's Kobe that's closing it out. After each incredible basket, the crowd grows louder and louder, as there's pretty much nothing to root for besides Kobe at a certain point. He then caps off his night with an insanely difficult three-pointer that basically only he can hit regularly. It was his 43rd point, and that triggered this unthinkable event.
You're seeing something that's very rare indeed. A Laker to get MVP chance
in Boston. Of all places.
Are you kidding me? I know Red Auerbach is rolling over.
Number 7. Kobe was actually outplayed in his first 50-point game. It's December of the 2000 to 2001 season. Kobe is just now starting to assert himself as one of the elite scorers of the NBA, as he took his average from 22.5 points per game to 28.5 this season. The 14-5 Lakers were taking on the 5-13 Warriors in a game they were obviously expected to win. The only significant thing the Lakers defense really had to worry about was that on the other side of the court was Antawn Jamison, who was coming off of a 51-point and 14-rebound performance against the Supersonics. What ensued was one of the most epic solo duels of Kobe's career, as both stars were trading baskets back and forth throughout the game. Kobe was on fire and was having probably the best game of his career up to that point, but Jamison was enjoying an encore performance from a few nights prior. The game eventually went to overtime and it came down to the final possession. Kobe shot a difficult 3 and missed wide right, and the Warriors won the game. Kobe finished with 51 points, 7 rebounds, and 8 assists on 51% shooting, just to be outdone by Jamison's 51 points, 13 rebounds, and 5 assists on 72% shooting. A pretty interesting footnote to two guys who would go on to be future teammates. Number 8. For a while, Kobe listened to Don't Stop Believing every single day. It's the 2008 NBA Finals, Game 6. One of the worst memories of any Lakers fan, and Kobe is no exception. The Lakers were destroyed by the rival Celtics by 39 points, sending the Lakers home. Amidst Kobe's tears and amidst the celebration in Boston, playing loudly throughout the stadium was Don't Stop Believing by Journey. For Kobe, the song naturally became attached to the painful memory of falling short to the Celtics and failing to win a championship. So Kobe responded by doing one of the most Mamba mentality things ever, and listened to the song every single day leading up to his 2009 championship in order to keep the pain and motivation fresh in his mind. If we do the math, that's 362 straight days of listening to that song and reliving one of your worst experiences. It sounds crazy, but it worked. And this is why we celebrate this legend, because this guy was just wired differently, in such a way that inspires many of us. Let me start off this video by acknowledging the purple and gold elephant in the room. I am a lifelong Lakers fan, and I have made it very clear numerous times on my channel that Kobe Bryant is my favorite player of all time. So although I don't think I'm being biased with this opinion, it's still entirely possible. Maybe it's my own subconscious bias that's inspiring me to get this point across. But again, I don't think so. On this channel, in front of thousands of listeners, I've been critical of Kobe numerous times. For example, I believe his selfish finals MVP aspirations was the biggest reason the Lakers lost in the 2004 NBA Finals. I believe the Lakers making Kobe the highest paid player in the league after he tore his Achilles and was his mid-30s was one of the dumbest decisions the organization has ever made. And I also believe that Kobe's final 3 seasons after his Achilles tear was some of the ugliest basketball I have ever seen from a superstar player, as he shot only 36.6% in those last 3 seasons, while being among the league leaders in shot attempts per game. Fortunately, his 60-point farewell game kinda washed away the memory of just how bad those final 3 seasons were. So like I said before, although Kobe Bryant is my favorite player of all time, I at least try to be as objective as possible when talking about the game of basketball in general. So now for the topic at hand. Many people, and maybe even the majority of people who watch basketball, believe that Kobe Bryant quit on his team in Game 7 of the first round in the 2006 playoffs against the Phoenix Suns. The reason people believe this is because Kobe was publicly frustrated with the Lakers organization at this time, due to the lack of a solid supporting cast. Heading into the second half of Game 7, the Lakers were down by 15 points, and in the second half, Kobe was extremely passive and seemed reluctant to shoot the ball. After taking 13 shots in the first half, Kobe only took a total of 3 shots in the second half, and the Lakers ended up losing the deciding 7th game by a whopping 31 points. Given the fact that Kobe was a natural volume shooter, it seemed incredibly out of character for him to be so passive in the second half of a crucial game. So because of this, a narrative was firmly established that Kobe quit on his team in Game 7 of those playoffs, and it's a narrative that still regularly circulates in basketball discussions to this very day. Now for myself personally, I don't believe this narrative in the slightest, and I never have for that matter. As someone who watched every Laker game that season, I believe there is a legitimate reason why things played out the way that they did, but it requires the full context of that season. So if there's any video of mine that you watch till the very end, I ask that you would make it this one. So let's get into it. Like I mentioned before, back in my teenage years, I religiously watched every single Laker game. And I mean every single Laker game. If people ask me to go out to dinner, sorry, I can't. There's a Laker game tonight. Friends invited me to a youth group event? Sorry, I can't. There's a Laker game tonight. The girl I had a crush on invited me to her place. I would love to tomorrow, but there's a Laker game tonight. So with that being said, I vividly remember the themes and the talking points throughout that season. One of the themes was this: when Kobe wasn't scoring as much and he got his teammates involved, the Lakers tended to win games more often. This was a constant talking point during the Lakers pregame telecasts. Back then, on the Lakers local broadcast on Fox Sports Net, they had a pregame segment called Philosophy 101. It was a consistent pregame event where the Lakers head coach Phil Jackson was being interviewed by Bill McDonald. Before, he was the Lakers' official play-by-play commentator. Throughout the season, Phil was constantly preaching about the Lakers' need to get Kobe's teammates going as well. Although Kobe averaged 35.4 points per game that season, Phil Jackson understood that the Lakers' best recipe for success was to play a free-flowing team game. And to be honest, this has always been a major coaching tactic throughout Phil Jackson's career, as the triangle offense is one that requires plenty of ball movement, and one player constantly scoring in isolation plays is a disruption to that offense. In 1989, when Phil Jackson replaced Doug Collins as the head coach of the Chicago Bulls, he asked Michael Jordan to decrease his scoring and share the basketball more in order to win more basketball games. In 2003, when Kobe scored 40 points in 9 straight games, Phil asked Kobe to put an end to that streak so they could get Shaquille O'Neal more involved in the offense. And again, in 2006, Phil was constantly telling Kobe that he needed to trust his teammates more in order for them to be successful. And you know what? Based on the evidence we have from the Lakers' 05-06 season, Phil Jackson was right. When it came to Kobe's scoring, there was a sweet spot for the Lakers that season. Phil Jackson knew this, the Lakers broadcast crew knew this, and I, as a frequently spectating Lakers fan, came to learn this. In the 05-06 regular season, in games where Kobe scored 27 to 34 points, the Lakers had a remarkable 15-3 record. This was a Lakers team that finished as a 7th seed in the NBA playoffs. Yet when Kobe was scoring in this points range, the Lakers were winning at the rate of a first-seeded team. Now on the other hand, in games where Kobe scored 35 to 42 points, the Lakers had a disappointing 13-15 record. That's quite the contrast between the two different approaches. The coaching staff understood that when the Lakers played a natural flowing team game, they were pretty successful. But when it was all about isolation plays in the Kobe show, they were struggling just to be a team above 500. Obviously, if Kobe's going to score 81 points or 62 points in just 3 quarters, the Lakers are going to win those games. But if Kobe is going to have a game where he scores merely 40 points, then it would have been better for him to score only 30 while keeping his teammates involved. This wasn't just a theme of the Lakers' regular season, but this theme carried over into the playoffs against the Phoenix Suns. After the first 4 games in this playoff series, the Lakers had a commanding 3-1 lead over Phoenix. The thing is, Kobe wasn't looking to score very much as the Lakers were dominating the Suns, as he averaged only 23 points per game over the course of the first 4 games. Now games 5 and 6 were a totally different approach. In those games, Kobe averaged a ridiculously efficient 39.5 points per game. In those 2 games, he was hitting 57.7% of his shots, and 50% from 3-point range. Yet the Lakers still lost both of those games. Up to the point of Game 7, this theme had been consistent throughout the entirety of the season. The Lakers coaching staff knew this, and Kobe Bryant knew this. When Game 7 started, Kobe continued his scoring onslaught, trying to will his team to the second round with his scoring ability. There was only one problem though. At the end of the first half, Kobe had 23 points on 61.5% shooting, yet his Lakers were still losing by 15 points. At this pace, with this current tactic, Kobe is going to have another game where he scores over 40 points, but his Lakers are going to lose by 30. Kobe's shoot first, pass second strategy wasn't working. It didn't work throughout the regular season, it didn't work in games 5 and 6, and it certainly wasn't working in the first half of game 7. So when Kobe came out in the second half of game 7 looking to pass the ball, I didn't see a player who was quitting on his team by being passive. No, I saw a player who knew that what he was doing up to this point wasn't working, so he tried the exact opposite. I saw a Kobe who was desperately trying to get his teammates going because he knew that it was the only shot he had at defeating the Phoenix Suns. Now obviously, this tactic didn't work either, as Kobe's teammates only shot 33.3% from the field in the second half, and the Lakers ended up losing by 31 points. Now here's the thing, this wasn't just my observation after watching Game 7, but this is pretty close to Phil Jackson's and Kobe Bryant's explanation of what actually happened. Take a listen.
Well, we wanted to get back in the ball game. We're running stuff through other guys. Nash was a little bit banged up. We're trying to, work at that end of it, trying to go inside to Lamar, get an inside-out game, and Kobe just sat on that game and let the other things happen.
When your approach to the second half, you only took a couple of shots.
Well, if we're going to get back in this type of a game, we have to have everybody contributing. In the first half, started, picking it up offensively just to keep us in the hunt. In the second half, when we're going to get back in these type of games, everybody starts getting in the rhythm. Then everybody gets pumped up about the game. It just didn't happen for us.
So now you're trying to tell me that Kobe freaking Bryant, one of the most driven, hardworking, and competitive athletes in human history, just laid over and accepted defeat? Are you serious? Kobe is one of the last people that I could ever envision doing that, based on his personality and his reputation. Guys like that don't just lay over and quit due to pettiness. For me, it's way harder to believe that a highly competitive person made a complete out-of-character action by quitting on his team than it is for me to believe that Kobe being passive was his desperate attempt to give his team a chance at winning the game.
Kobe's famous 5th championship ring is one of the most iconic moments of his legendary career, but it also happens to be one of his most highly criticized moments as well. Kobe famously shot 6 of 24 from the field on the deciding 7th game of the 2010 NBA Finals. That's only 25% from the field, and in Kobe's own words, he couldn't hit water if he was shooting off a boat. Because of Kobe's poor shooting percentage, this has led some to say that Kobe was lucky to win his 5th ring, and some go even as far as saying that Pau Gasol saved Kobe's legacy. Today, I'm busting this myth. The Lakers-Celtics rivalry was defined by defense and physicality. That was never more present than in this deciding 7th game. If you watched that game, it was clear that the referees didn't want to interfere with the game and set the tone early by putting away their whistles. Due to this, Game 7 was one of the most physical and ugly games of NBA history. As a result, almost nobody shot well because of this. Pierce was 5 of 15, Allen was 3 of 14, Artest was 7 of 18, Gasol was 6 of 16, and Bynum was 1 of 5. The final score was 83-79, which is indicative of the grittiness and ugliness of that game as a whole, and not just from Kobe. In a game as physical as this one, 2 of the most crucial aspects would be defense and rebounding, and in both areas, Kobe excelled. He hauled in 15 hard-earned rebounds, with several of those coming in extremely clutch moments. The last reason why Kobe's legacy wasn't saved is because the series shouldn't have even gone to a 7th game for Kobe to be criticized in the first place. The Lakers lost Game 5 of that series in Boston, but that's a game they should have won even if Kobe had just a little help. At one point, Kobe scored 23 straight Laker points. From midway through the second quarter to midway through the third quarter, Kobe was the only Laker who scored any points. He finished with 38 of the team's final 86 points, yet they were just short of the victory. With even a little support in that game, Lakers end up winning the championship in 6 games. Kobe deserved MVP that series, and honestly, it's disrespectful to suggest that anybody saved his legacy. I know what some of you guys are already thinking. Underrated? Everyone talks about Kobe, and most people recognize his 06 season as the best year of his career. How could Johnny possibly be crazy enough to call this famous season underrated? Well, dear viewer, the literal definition of underrate is to underestimate the extent, value, or importance of someone or something. It doesn't mean that people don't know about it, or that they don't recognize it as something good. Essentially, it simply means it's better than you think. Many forms of media have done lists that rank the greatest individual seasons of all time. Bleacher Report did one. Let's check for 06 Kobe. Nope, not in the top 10, or even an honorable mention. I've checked a few other lists, and know that this is a common theme. It's one thing for me to just point out that Kobe doesn't make these lists, but to understand how preposterous that really is, we need to dig into the details of this season and evaluate how it compares to other great seasons of NBA history. In Kobe's 05-06 season, he averaged 35.4 points, 5.3 rebounds, 4.5 assists, and 1.8 steals on 45% shooting. I would say he led the Lakers, but that would be a massive understatement. He carried the Lakers to a 45-37 record, which was good enough for the 7th seed in the loaded Western Conference. It was incredible that they were able to win 45 games, considering Kobe famously played with a below-average supporting cast. He was first-team All-NBA, first-team All-Defense, and finished 4th in MVP voting. That's right, all of that gets you just 4th place on the MVP leaderboard. More on that later, but first, let's get into even more details. Kobe's 06 campaign gave us 6 50-point games, 27 40-point games, his 81-point performance, which is the second greatest in NBA history, where he also scored 55 points in the second half alone, and just a month before that, he gave us 62 points in 3 quarters against the Dallas Mavericks. Through 3 quarters, Kobe outscored the entire Mavericks team 62-61. That wasn't just any Mavericks team either. This was an elite defensive team that also made it to the NBA Finals that season. No player in the history of the league has ever single-handedly outscored an entire team over the course of a game. If Kobe had simply played the 4th quarter, he would have had a legitimate shot at doing it. This 06 season was the 9th highest points per game season in NBA history. It made Kobe one of only 5 players to ever average over 35 points in a season. For this next point, we'll be excluding Wilt Chamberlain because he's pretty ridiculous. The only people ahead of Kobe other than Wilt on that list are Rick Barry in 1966 with an average of 35.6 points, James Harden in 2019 with 36.1, and Michael Jordan in 1987 with 37.1. Excluding Wilt, these were the greatest scoring seasons of all time, so these will be the years I'll be comparing with Kobe's 06 season. Despite the fact that Kobe is below those 3 wing players on this list, I'll argue that Kobe's season is clearly the most impressive from a scoring perspective. In the 66-67 season, Rick Barry averaged 35.6 points, and teams around the league were averaging 117.4 points per game. That means that Rick Barry averaged 30.3% of what was the league's team average. In 2019, Harden averaged 36.1 points, while teams were averaging 111.2 points. That's 32.4%. In 1987, Jordan averaged 37.1, and the league averaged 109.9. That's 33.7%. When Kobe put up 35.4 points per game, he did it during one of the lowest scoring seasons in NBA history, as teams were averaging only 97 points per game, which equals 36.5% for Kobe. In 2006, only 5 teams averaged more than 100 points a game, and Kobe's Lakers were not one of them. In James Harden's season, Rick Barry's season, and Michael Jordan's season, every single team in the league averaged over 103 points per game. If that doesn't get the point across, this definitely will. Statistically speaking, in Jordan and Harden's seasons, the worst offense in the entire league would be the second best offense in Kobe's season. In Rick Barry's season, the worst offense in the entire league would easily be the best offense in Kobe's season. Not only did Kobe average 35.5 points in 2006, but he did it at a time when it wasn't supposed to happen. There was significantly less offense, but Kobe was good enough to be the offense for his team, more so than any other player not named Wilt Chamberlain. On top of all of this, Kobe averaged only 3.1 turnovers that year, which is the fewest among this group we're comparing. We've talked a lot about how impressive these seasons were offensively, but consider this. Kobe was the only player out of this group to also make the All-Defense team the same season. Not only that, but Kobe made first team All-Defense, meaning that not only was he the best scorer that season, but he was also the best defender at his position as well. In fact, Kobe's the only player in NBA history to average over 35 points per game while being first team All-Defense. So in a quick recap, Kobe put up 35.4 points on 45% shooting, regardless of the fact that he was facing double teams all year with a below average supporting cast. He carried the offense, he was one of the best defenders in the league, and he drug his team to the playoffs even though they had no business being there. That is the definition of a valuable player. So the fact that Kobe only finished 4th in the most valuable player race is absurd. Instead, Steve Nash was that season's MVP. LeBron James was 2nd, and Dirk Nowitzki was 3rd, even though the 4th placed Kobe seemed like he had the best season of the guys on this list. And I'll explain why this happened. There is a consistent formula to the NBA's MVP voting. There's 2 key aspects. 1, obviously, you have to have strong stats, and 2, you have to have a winning team. This is another major reason why Kobe's 06 season is underrated, because the formula is stupid, and he should have won MVP that year, or at the very least, should have finished higher than 4th place. The award isn't called the best player on an elite team. Either change the name of the award or start getting it right. The most valuable player, in a literal sense, isn't always on a top 2 team in the conference. Without Kobe, the Lakers would have been at the very bottom of the Western Conference. Why would you expect a guy who has Smush Parker, Kwame Brown, and Luke Walton in his starting lineup to win 60 games?
Kwame Brown, God bless him, is a scrub.
That's ridiculous and completely unrealistic, but that's basically the way it works when it comes to MVP voting. As all of you know, Kobe Bryant was one of the most lethal scoring assassins in NBA history. His most iconic and memorable scoring performance was of course his 81-point game. But what if I told you that this game was only one of several games where Kobe could have possibly scored 80 points? At the end of the 3rd quarter of the 81-point game, Kobe had a total of 53 points. On several other occasions, Kobe had a similar performance through 3 quarters and didn't even play in the 4th quarter. Today, we take a look at some of those less-known scoring outbursts from the Black Mamba. Here's 5 games Kobe could have scored 80 points. Number 5. January 2002 versus the Grizzlies. When people remember the early years of Kobe's career, they probably think of the domination and championships Kobe and Shaq were able to accomplish as a dynamic duo. Phil Jackson was the head coach of those championship teams, and he coached the team using the triangle offense. It was an offense that featured lots of cuts and entry passes designed to get players into favorable positions for scoring. In other words, the offense was run through Shaq. Even with an offensive scheme that highly emphasized feeding the big man, Kobe was still managing to average near 30 points a game. But I remember watching Laker games as a teenager wondering what Kobe would have been capable of offensively if Shaq wasn't always there demanding the ball. What would Kobe be able to do in an offense more geared to giving him the majority of the scoring opportunities? Well, on January 14th, 2002, we got to find out. Shaq was then serving a 3-game suspension for getting into a fight with the Chicago Bulls' Brad Miller. Fortunately, Shaq is as efficient with his punches as he is with his free throws, and Brad was able to live another day. Kobe decided to honor Shaq that game by writing his number 34 onto his shoes. Even with Shane Battier, one of the premier defenders in the league, guarding Kobe, he could still not be stopped that night. He was doing everything on the floor offensively, torching anyone and everyone who tried to slow him down, including his future teammate Pau Gasol. At the end of the third quarter, Kobe had 56 points on 21 of 34 shooting, while the entire Grizzlies team had only 59 points. When you consider that Kobe had 53 points at the end of the third quarter of the 81 game, you could see how easily Kobe could have had 70 and possibly an 80-point evening that night against Memphis. Only one problem. The Lakers were up over the Grizzlies 98-59 at the end of the third quarter, so Kobe sat out the entire fourth quarter. Number 4. February 2003 versus the Nuggets. This next scoring outburst was the third game of Kobe's historic 40-point scoring streak, which was 9 straight games. On the second game of a back-to-back, Kobe looked just as fresh as ever. He was hitting everything from highly contested fadeaways to acrobatic and furious finishes at the rim. With Kobe on fire to the extent that he was, the game was never in question, and the Lakers had a 32-point lead at halftime. Kobe didn't slow up, coming out firing in the third quarter and continuing to torch all of the nuggets thrown at him. In only 31 minutes, Kobe scored his total of 51 points with over 3 minutes left in the third quarter. Once again, due to the Lakers having a lead of over 30 points, Kobe did not play in the fourth quarter. As far-fetched as it might seem that Kobe would have scored 29 points in the fourth quarter if he had played, Kobe has managed to score 28 to 30-point quarters on numerous occasions, and considering that he had 53 at the end of the third of the 81 game, who knows what this game's total could have amounted to. Number 3. November 2006 versus the Jazz. As a rookie, Kobe began his career with his famous airballs in the playoffs versus the Utah Jazz. It seems as though Kobe has been out for revenge on them ever since. In this 2006 matchup with the Utah Jazz, Kobe continued to embarrass the Utah defense. The Jazz threw several different defenders at Kobe, including the respected and elite defender Andrei Kirilenko. Like many times before, it didn't matter who defended Kobe this evening, as Kobe had one of the most efficiently explosive scoring performances of his career. He started the game hot, scoring 22 points in the first half, but he completely erupted in the third quarter, scoring 30 points, including an incredible sequence in which Kobe made 11 straight shots without a miss. At the end of the third quarter, Kobe had 52 points on a remarkable 19 of 26 shooting on only 34 minutes played. The Lakers were up by 22 points at the end of the third, and once again, Kobe did not play in the fourth quarter. Number 2. December 2005 versus the Mavericks. Maybe the most incredible scoring performance of Kobe's career. Yeah, I said it. This game took place early in Kobe's famous 05-06 season, a game that would set the tone for an incredible record-breaking season. On the opponent's sideline was a familiar face to Kobe, Dallas Mavericks assistant coach Del Harris. Harris was Kobe's head coach in his rookie season with the Lakers in 1996. After tearing it up in the Summer League, Kobe came into the NBA as a confident rookie, ready to sink his teeth into the competition. Harris had other plans though, which included giving the veterans the majority of the minutes while Kobe watched from the bench. Kobe only played a minimal 15.5 minutes per game in his rookie season, an experience that Kobe never forgot. And in this evening against the Dallas Mavericks, he was getting his revenge. According to Kobe, he used this as motivation to have one of the most amazing performances of his career. Kobe went on an absolute tear, scoring in a multitude of ways that the Mavericks had absolutely no answer for. He scored 32 points in the first half and had 30 in the third quarter alone. At the end of the third quarter, The score on the Jumbotron showed Kobe with 62 points, Dallas 61. He outscored an entire team through 3 quarters. This game is the reason why people who discredit Kobe for scoring 81 points on a weak Raptors defense just look ridiculous, because he arguably did something more impressive just 1 month prior. This wasn't just any ordinary team that Kobe outscored through 3 quarters. This was a Dallas Mavericks team ranked 7th in points allowed that year, who also went on to the NBA Finals that season. Listen to this. Even though Wilt had a 100-point game, the final score of that game was 169 to 147. Wilt was nowhere close to outscoring the opposing team. Kobe not only could have easily had 80 this night, but he had a chance to do something that's never been done before in league history, outscoring an opposing team single-handedly. But when given the option, Kobe passed at the opportunity to play in the 4th quarter due to the game being essentially decided with the Lakers leading by 34 points entering the 4th quarter. Lakers assistant coach and former teammate Brian Shaw asked Kobe if he was crazy for choosing to sit out of the 4th quarter, saying to Kobe, "If you play in this 4th quarter, you could get 80. To which Kobe responded, "Nah, we're up by 30. When the time is right and the team needs it, I'll do it."
Kobe Bryant and LeBron James, widely recognized as the 2 greatest players since the turn of the millennium. Despite being the greatest players, these two never really shared a rivalry, as they played in separate conferences and unfortunately never met up in the NBA Finals. But with that being said, there was one special week of NBA history where these 2 MVP candidates were competing to display the greatest show at the basketball mecca, Madison Square Garden. So who would be crowned the King of New York, LeBron or Kobe? To get an answer to that, let's take a dive back into this week in history. It's February 2nd, 2009, and the 37-9 Lakers are set to square off with the 21-25 Knicks, who were actually riding high on a 3-game winning streak. Although Kobe and the Lakers were enjoying the best record in the Western Conference, there was also a very somber mood to this team, as their previous game was against the Memphis Grizzlies, and in that contest, Kobe fell on Andrew Bynum's leg, severely injuring the star center, which was obviously a massive blow to the Lakers' championship hopes. After the loss to the Celtics in the previous NBA Finals, Kobe spoke about how Andrew's rebounding and rim protection was missed, and likely played a part in the Lakers losing the series. So to then see Bynum go down again almost felt as if we were seeing the Lakers' championship hopes go up in flames once again, and you could see it on the Mamba's face. The morning of this matchup with the Knicks, news broke to the Lakers that Bynum had suffered a torn MCL and was likely to miss the rest of the season. With this massive blow to their confidence and psyche, Kobe took it upon himself as a leader to re-energize his teammates and convince them that come hell or high water, they're still winning this championship. Leading up to tip-off, Kobe was laser-focused and barely spoke to anyone, and that level of concentration would pay off on the court. Kobe came out hot and seemingly couldn't miss anything. A desperate New York squad threw all kinds of different defenders at him, like Quentin Richardson, Wilson Chandler, and even David Lee took some shots at him as well. But it didn't matter, the result was the same each time. No one was stopping the Mamba on a mission this night. The shots he was hitting had an insane degree of difficulty that was leaving the crowd oohing and awing. As the game was beginning to get out of hand, the New York crowd had lost interest in the Knicks' chances to win the game, and instead, they were cheering on Kobe as he was making history. With his 56th point, he became the highest scoring road player in the history of Madison Square Garden, eclipsing Michael Jordan's iconic double nickel game. When Kobe scored his 61st point, he became the highest scoring player in Madison Square Garden history, surpassing Bernard King's 60-point performance in 1984. As a triumphant Kobe went to the bench, he was showered with MVP chants from an appreciative New York crowd, which only a few players can ever say they've accomplished. On the evening, Kobe finished with 61 points and 3 assists on 76.6 true shooting percentage, and the Lakers won the game 126 to 117. The Knicks didn't have very long to mourn their embarrassing defeat, because their very next game was just 2 nights later against LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers. LeBron had his own interesting story heading into this New York matchup. James had a massive free agency decision to make in the foreseeable future, and at the time, the New York Knicks appeared to be the favorite to land the king, and for good reasons. LeBron was doing just about as much flirting with the Knicks organization that he could have without getting fined for tampering. He was famously known to be a New York Yankees fan, even going as far as wearing their merchandise to a Cleveland Indians game. LeBron had also been very vocal about the fact that Madison Square Garden was his favorite place to play basketball. So knowing these things, anytime LeBron played at MSG, it was a must-see event, as you expected to see the best from an auditioning LeBron. But having this matchup come so shortly after Kobe Bryant's record-breaking performance, we all knew that LeBron had a little extra motivation on this night. When the game began, LeBron was doing just about everything on the court, but you could also tell that his mindset was just a little different, as he was extremely aggressive offensively and was quick to let it fly from the perimeter, which was not his usual style at this point in his career. With that being said, LeBron was scorching hot and was destroying many of the same defenders that Kobe lit up just a couple nights earlier. To end the first quarter, LeBron hit a jumper at the buzzer, which gave him more points through the first quarter than Kobe had through his, and the New York crowd knew then that they were in for another long night. As the game continued, LeBron didn't let up with his efficient sniping, but whenever he wasn't scoring, he was also controlling the game as the floor general, finding his perimeter shooters whenever he drew most of the attention. Again, there wasn't much the Knicks could do to slow the superstar down, and as the game was approaching its end, LeBron was drawing close to history of his own. With this rebound in the final few seconds, LeBron secured his 10th board, which gave him the historic triple-double. He finished the game with 52 points, 11 assists, and 10 rebounds on 62.9 true shooting percentage. At this point, LeBron became only the 5th player in NBA history to ever achieve a 50-point triple-double, and this was also the only one to ever take place in Madison Square Garden. Unfortunately, these historic records for LeBron only lasted about 2 days, because the NBA went back and reviewed LeBron's 9th rebound, which he got with only 39 seconds left in the game, and they ultimately decided to take it away and credit it to his teammate Ben Wallace instead. Sorry for the poor quality, but this is the best version of the rebound that I can find. Personally, I don't see how they're justified in taking this rebound away from LeBron, considering how Wallace never seemed to have fully secured the loose ball before LeBron grabs hold of it. Regardless of how we personally feel about it, LeBron's official stat line now stands as 52 points, 11 assists, and 9 rebounds. This week of basketball should be remembered as one of the greatest of NBA history, as it not only featured 2 all-time great performances, but it was also about the incredible stories revolving around these performances. Kobe's leadership would become fruitful as his Lakers would go on to win the NBA championship regardless of the devastating Andrew Bynum injury. And as for LeBron, he would later beat out Kobe Bryant for the league MVP award, and he wouldn't go on to join the Knicks after all, but instead disappointed both New York and Cleveland fans when he famously decided to take his talents to South Beach. Unfortunately, we never got the rivalry we wanted so badly between these two legends, but at the very least, this week in New York was a small highlight of the greats competing against one another for the title of the King of New York. They're the 2 greatest shooting guards of basketball history, and although they sometimes appeared as mirror images of one another in terms of style, mentality, and personality, both individuals were actually much more different than the fans typically recognize. I've witnessed countless hours of both of these legends playing the game of basketball, and today, I'm breaking down every major difference that I could recognize in how the two approached and played the game. Obviously, this is just my own limited perspective, so let me know in the comments what are some differences that you've noticed. Number 1. Michael Jordan had much bigger hands. To people who don't know basketball on a deep level, this might initially seem like an insignificant detail, but it's actually quite the opposite. Phil Jackson has spoken in depth about the advantages Jordan had due to his monstrous hands, and even Jordan himself has elaborated on the edge it gave over the competition. Jordan's hands weren't just large for his stature, but he actually had some of the largest hands of any player of NBA history. With Jordan's massive mitts, he could easily palm and control the basketball, and he could use greater pump fakes and misdirect players more easily. It also allowed him to effortlessly alter and change his shot in midair, which would certainly be more difficult for players who had less control of the basketball due to their smaller hands. and obviously, in an era of hand checking, it made Jordan even more difficult defensively. In an interview in 2013, Kobe spoke about the difficulties of developing his game without that inherent advantage, saying, "Michael was blessed with massive hands, and Dr. J as well. I wasn't. I have big hands, but Jordan and Irving can literally pick up the ball like an orange. So I've had to do things to strengthen my hands, strengthen my forearms, to make sure that I have the grip to be able to do it. They obviously had the natural capabilities to do it. I had to work to get the strength to be able to do it." Number 2. Kobe was a harder worker. This is certainly a bold claim, and isn't meant as a slight to MJ, as he's certainly one of the hardest working basketball players that the game has ever seen. But on the other hand, Kobe has an argument for being the hardest working athlete of all time. As I mentioned in a previous video, the great Phil Jackson made this bold claim himself, which is quite stunning since he spent all of his coaching career with Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. Feel free to pause the video for more time to read Phil Jackson's full quote. As legendary as Kobe's drive was, I could even argue that it was sometimes a negative for Kobe, as he pushed himself so hard that it sometimes had lingering effects on his body. The Mamba was known to play through injury, play heavy minutes, put an insane amount of time into the gym, and apparently lived most of his basketball life on only 4 hours of sleep each night. With an insane work ethic like that, it's no wonder why he's one of the greatest players of all time. But then again, it also makes sense why he dealt with so many injuries throughout his career, considering the fact that he willingly put so much strain on his body. Number 3. Kobe was a better perimeter shooter. Numerous people have made the same conclusion, including Michael Jordan's longtime teammate Scottie Pippen. When you look at their three-point percentage next to one another, Kobe has a very slight advantage, and it's so close that you could basically call it a tie. But one of the key differences was the fact that Kobe had a much higher tendency of shooting three-pointers, as he shot more than 3 times as many as Jordan did over the course of his career. Some of that has to do with the surge in three-point attempts as the game has evolved, but even if you adjust for inflation, Kobe still had a higher tendency of three-point attempts. Analytics have proven that as you take more shots, percentages generally decrease, because you can be less selective with your opportunities, and yet despite that, the Mamba maintains his edge. The perimeter shot advantage isn't just about three-pointers though. Kobe loved to take shots in rhythm just a step or two inside of the three-point line. The Mamba was excellent at these shots, whether he was open or contested. With that being said, analytics show that generally these are the most inefficient shots on the court, mostly because of their distance and lower conversion rate, while still being worth only 2 points. Which brings us to the next difference. Number 4. Michael Jordan had better shot selection. It's no secret that Michael was a more efficient scorer than Kobe Bryant, averaging 30 points per game over the course of his career on nearly 50% shooting. A big reason for Jordan's significant edge over Kobe in field goal efficiency was because of MJ's sound decision making. Although Michael is famous for making some difficult shots, he certainly wasn't seeking them out. In his younger years, Jordan scored a large portion of his points in the paint and from the free throw line. As he aged, his game became more about the mid-range, and he rarely settled for more difficult opportunities, as he used his high basketball IQ to put himself in good positions to score. Although Kobe had many of these same skills as Jordan, the Mamba's supreme confidence led him to take a tremendous amount of difficult shots that most players wouldn't attempt. During his prime, it was common on a nightly basis for him to shoot through double teams, take heavily contested and off-balance shots from the perimeter, and he took a ton of what us hoopers would call heat check shots. Once again, Phil Jackson gave his own perspective on this topic, and said that Jordan always played within the flow of the team's offense and rarely tried to force anything, while Kobe may have been the more explosive player, but he also had a strong tendency of trying to force the situation and take over games offensively. Number 5. Jordan was the more durable athlete. I somewhat alluded to this earlier, but Kobe was dealing with injuries throughout the majority of his career and caused him to miss well over 100 games. Even in the games where he played, he was often dealing with nagging pain in his hands, wrists, shoulders, knees, and ankles. On the other hand, other than Jordan's second season with a broken foot, he rarely missed any games due to an injury and was often performing at full strength. In fact, excluding his second season, Jordan missed only 7 out of a possible 919 games with the Bulls. This was a testament to his stellar conditioning and his God-given athleticism. Number 6. Kobe was better with his left hand. It's not like there's any fancy left-handed specific stats that I can share with you guys, but you'll just have to take my word for it on this one. Now, Jordan has possibly the greatest layup package in NBA history, and a major aspect of that was his incredible ability to finish the play with his left hand. If that was the only aspect we were looking at, then this advantage would go to Jordan. But I'm pretty sure that Kobe still could have been a legit star even if he had to use his left hand as his dominant hand. The Mamba was working on his left-handed game from an extremely early age. When he broke his right hand, he showed up to Lakers practice and shot entirely with his left hand. And when he injured his right shoulder, he played a significant amount of a regular season game with only his left hand. And of course, many of us remember the ridiculous turnaround left-handed three against the Dallas Mavericks. If Kobe had to play a mid-range game as a left-handed shooter, he's one of the few stars who I believe could still be a successful scorer. Number 7. Michael Jordan had a greater vertical leap. Vertical leap comparisons are usually a sure way to get comment sections in heated debates, because it's hard to get credible and precise estimations of each player's leap. With that being said, most listings have Jordan's leap between 46 and 48 inches, while Kobe's is listed around only 38 inches. Even by just the eye test, it's not hard to see how Jordan could have such a tremendous vertical, considering his iconic and comfortably stylish free throw line dunks, and also how Jordan made his hang time famous by appearing to simply wait in the air for his defender to make his descent. Number 8. Michael Jordan is a more competitive person. Whether this is an advantage for MJ or a problem for MJ is really up to your interpretation. When it comes to their mentalities on the basketball court, both players were about as competitive, driven, and intense as a player could possibly be. But off the court is another story. In Kobe Bryant's own words, Michael Jordan was a more competitive person, from the standpoint that Jordan was competitive about more things. I don't think Kobe would have ever conceded that anyone cared more about the outcome of a basketball game than he did. But in an interview, Kobe explained that he's only extremely competitive about the things he cares about, while Jordan is competitive in absolutely everything. Kobe gave a funny example of a time the two athletes were out to dinner together and how Jordan would eat the food quickly just to finish his meal before Kobe did. There's many more differences between these two great basketball legends, but these were the biggest ones in my opinion.
The 2012-2013 Los Angeles Lakers, one of the most hyped teams of NBA history. Most of us have a general idea of how this story ends, but within that, there are many details that often get missed, and honestly, there's enough story in this season for there to be an entire documentary or an ESPN 30 for 30 on it. Alas, I'll do my best to tell the story of the 2013 Lakers and of Kobe's epic last stand. The Lakers were coming off of a disappointing 2011-2012 season that ended in the semifinals to the Oklahoma City Thunder. With their team growing older and no longer seen as legitimate title contenders, the Lakers were desperate to shake up their roster to return to title contention. The Lakers proceeded to make two major trades that offseason that left the NBA world stunned. First, the Lakers acquired future Hall of Famer Steve Nash for 4 future first-round draft picks. Nash was a passing wizard, but he was also in his late 30s and had been having off and on back problems the previous year. Regardless, LA fans were ecstatic with the acquisition. Next, the Lakers traded Andrew Bynum to land the big man, Dwight Howard. Dwight was already a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year and was widely considered as the top center in the NBA at this point. Howard was coming off of off-season back surgery though, and it was unclear how that might affect his performance. Even with some injury concerns, the Lakers were still one of the most hyped teams in the history of the NBA. With Steve Nash running the point, Kobe Bryant scoring, Meta World Peace shutting down the opponent defensively, and Pau Gasol and Dwight Howard dominating the paint, the Lakers seemed almost unstoppable. Many experts were predicting the Lakers to challenge the Bulls' 72-10 record, and a finals matchup with LeBron James and the Miami Heat almost seemed like a foregone conclusion. It was a very happy and exciting time in Los Angeles, that is, until the games actually started. Head coach of the Lakers, Mike Brown, was running the Princeton offense. It was an offense that obviously originated at Princeton University as early as the late 1930s. It's a system that relies heavily upon screens, motion passing, and backdoor cuts. It was an interesting strategy, considering that it was unfamiliar to veteran players and it was also so rarely seen in the NBA, but Mike Brown thought it would be the perfect system for this squad. Unfortunately, what seemed good in theory did not translate to the court, and LA started the preseason just 0-8. It was the preseason though, so the players downplayed those results in interviews. The real games began, and the Lakers started the regular season 1-4, and just like that, Mike Brown was fired. Now you know expectations are high when your brand new head coach only makes it 5 games into the season before he loses his job. The Lakers team had bigger issues though. They were slow, old, and clearly unhealthy. Dwight Howard's back surgery didn't allow him to have the same level of athleticism as before. Steve Nash had off-and-on injuries to go along with his ever-lingering back problems, and Metta World Peace was growing slower with age and was unable to stretch the floor on offense due to his inconsistent shooting. Assistant coach Bernie Bickerstaff took over as interim head coach, leading the Lakers to a 4-1 record during his short tenure. Meanwhile, the Lakers management searched for the head coach of the future. With the search underway, rumors began to swirl that a familiar face was the frontrunner for the position. 11-time NBA champion head coach Phil Jackson seemed to be a lock to land the job. Phil was initially offered the position, but asked the Lakers organization to give him the weekend to make his decision because he was unsure if he could make the commitment physically. Phil had come to his conclusion and was prepared to tell the Lakers on Monday morning that he would be accepting the job. According to Phil, he received a call on Sunday close to midnight from Lakers general manager Mitch Kupchak, notifying him to cancel their meeting since they've now selected Mike D'Antoni as their new head coach. Lakers management said they believed Mike fit the team's personnel best, but the move was baffling. The Lakers passed on Phil Jackson, a coach who has a history of success with the organization, with Kobe Bryant, and with managing egos. A coach who has already demonstrated how to run a dominant offense with 2 big men in the paint. Instead, the team opted for Mike D'Antoni, a coach who has never made an appearance to an NBA Finals. A coach who has had a reputation for having no clue how to coach defensively and having a mentality of simply trying to outscore opponents. A coach who is famous for his 7-second offense, which revolves around speed and perimeter shooting, was now in charge of the oldest team in the league with 2 big men and no perimeter presence. And the one and only player in the starting 5 who can hit the long ball consistently also happens to be the one guy who was supposed to be doing all the distributing. You see, the idea was that Mike D'Antoni and Steve Nash rejoining forces would lead them to replicating their glory days of the Phoenix Suns offense in the mid-2000s. Yep, that's right. The Lakers put all of their eggs in the basket of an underachieving head coach and an injury-prone 39-year-old point guard. Just days after Mike D'Antoni had been hired as the Lakers head coach, Phil Jackson was asked in an interview how he thought Mike would do in the role, and this was his response.
Mike, with the right personnel, is a great coach.
Okay.
You know, and this personnel really wasn't quite fit for Mike's coaching.
Tell me why.
Well, he likes a 3-point shooting group of guys. He likes 2s and 3s in the corner. His great guard, Nash, was on the team. Obviously, Steve's a great guard. He can distribute the ball. But that other big guy has to be they call it now a stretch 4. He has to be able to shoot 3-pointers.
Yeah.
Powell wasn't quite fit into that. Powell and Howard together, too big, too much of a load for that post. And he doesn't really like guys in the post. He likes guys outside.
How incredibly accurate this prediction was from Phil just goes to show how much of a brilliant coaching mind Phil Jackson was. Mike D'Antoni did move Pau Gasol to the stretch 4 position, resulting in frustration for Pau and him shooting a career-worst 46.6% from the field and a terrible 28.6% from three-point range. It came to a point where Mike was at such a loss of how to successfully run this offense that Mike eventually regulated future Hall of Famer Pau Gasol to a reserve role off the bench. Now, coaching decisions weren't the only things the Lakers struggled with this year. The players missed a grand total of 182 games due to injury, which includes games from Steve Nash's leg fracture, Dwight's torn right labrum, and Pau Gasol's plantar fasciitis in his right foot. To go along with these injuries was a ton of drama between the players. Dwight was receiving a tremendous amount of pressure from Kobe to play through his torn labrum due to the growing concern that the Lakers would miss the playoffs. This was just part of the issues between Kobe and Dwight that put a strain on their relationship. The issues were downplayed by the team though. An example of this was Kobe posting this photo to his Twitter page mocking the notion that there was fighting going on between the two players. The tension was undeniable though. Dwight's fun and easygoing personality was struggling to fit into the Lakers organization, and he never seemed to be fully embraced by the fans. The high expectations and demanding culture was taking its toll on Dwight. One night, there was a telling argument between Dwight and Steve Nash on the court. When one of the most lighthearted, positive, encouraging players in the history of the game is angrily yelling at you, you're probably not fitting in that well. Dwight was in a contract year and had the option at any point to sign an extension with the Lakers, but he wasn't doing that. The feeling was growing within the organization that Dwight wasn't only going to test free agency, but that he was also leaning towards leaving the Lakers. This had giant implications on two Lakers, the first being Kobe Bryant. At this time, Kobe was 34 years old. He was still playing at an elite level, but he had definitely lost a step or two of athleticism, and his days as an MVP caliber player were numbered. With his body aging, Dwight Howard likely leaving in the offseason, and Steve Nash on the verge of turning 40 at the start of next season, this meant one thing for Kobe. This would likely be his last chance to win a 6th NBA championship. A championship that would put him on the same level as his childhood idol, Michael Jordan. A championship to put him ahead of Laker great Magic Johnson and finally solidify himself as the greatest Laker ever. Kobe knew this was his last chance, and Kobe played like it. Bryant was in the MVP conversation even though his star-studded team was floating around the 8th seed of the playoffs. That's because everyone could see that despite everything this team was going through, Kobe was carrying the team through it. Despite all the injuries, despite all the drama, despite all the adversity, come hell or high water, Kobe was willing this team to the playoffs. The other Laker who had giant implications on him was none other than Mike D'Antoni. The Lakers had no chemistry on and off the court. Mike D'Antoni hadn't replicated his glory days in Phoenix, and the Lakers' offense instead was clearly inferior to other teams around the league. Pau Gasol was grumbling over his role within the offense, Kobe was among the leaders in minutes per game when he should have reduced minutes at his age, Dwight was discontent to the point of looking like he planned on leaving the team, and on top of all of that, one of the most hyped teams in the history of the NBA was on the verge of missing the playoffs. All of these things could be pointed back to Mike D'Antoni and his inability to coach this team. At this point, it had become clear to many spectators and to Mike himself that Mike D'Antoni was fighting for his job. If Mike was going to have any future with his team, this team had to make the playoffs. This led Mike to make a decision, a big decision, a decision that I believe ended Kobe's career as a top player in this league. Mike was going to play Kobe every single minute of every single game if that's what it took to win each night. It was a risky decision considering Kobe's age and the significant amount of miles on his legs at this point, but Kobe agreed to the decision. At the time of this decision, the Lakers were 37-36 and just a half game ahead of the Utah Jazz for the 8th and final playoff spot. The Lakers won 3 out of the next 4 games, with Kobe raising his game to another level. He was doing absolutely everything for the Lakers, from the scoring, to the facilitating, to the hustle plays. Just 4 games into Kobe's new ridiculous workload, Ramona Shelburne, a senior writer who's been following the Lakers throughout her career, wrote an article about Kobe's insane amount of minutes and the risks involved. D'Antoni said in the article, "We're short-handed right now and we're playing it very tight. Normally this wouldn't happen, but we've put ourselves in a hole and Kobe is our best bet going forward to win games. He said he's going to retire after a year, so we're going to get our money's worth for 2 years. I don't know what to tell you." The decision continued to receive some criticism, but it was clear Mike was sticking with the plan, and Kobe continued to grind, leading the Lakers to win the next 2 games over the Hornets and Trailblazers, and that brings us to April 12th, 2013. Kobe was on a tear, averaging 28.9 points, 8.4 assists, and 7.3 rebounds, while playing 45.6 minutes per game during this stretch. This Friday night was another crucial home game against the young and upcoming Golden State Warriors. It would take everything from Kobe to get a win this night, because Steph Curry was on the opposing side and he was on his game this evening. After all the minutes leading up to this match, Kobe had described his body as feeling a little stiff to start the game. He played the entire first quarter, but didn't end up scoring his first points until the second quarter, and then he began to hit his groove. For every difficult shot that Curry was hitting, Kobe had an answer, refusing to let this game slip away. He played the entire second quarter. With 10 minutes left in the third, Kobe drove baseline and was met by several defenders. After the contact, he was on the ground bracing his knee. The stadium went silent as if their worst fears were being realized, and it appeared as if Kobe's body had finally taken more than it could handle. After a couple minutes, Kobe walked it off and remained in the game, as the entire building took a sigh of relief. 6 minutes left in the third quarter now, and again, Kobe attacks the basket and comes up limping. This time, it was his right ankle. Red flag after red flag, indicators that this load is too much, but Kobe fought through the pain and remained in the game without missing a minute. Into the fourth quarter, with Kobe and Curry continuing to trade baskets, the Lakers found themselves down by 6 points with just minutes left. Then, Kobe hit a clutch three to make it a one-possession game, and the crowd was going nuts. The Lakers get a stop, and Kobe again has the ball. Harrison Barnes is all over him, and then Kobe does what he's done so many times and buries another clutch three right in the defender's face. The crowd erupts, and the look on Kobe's face is sheer determination, which leads the Lakers commentator Stu Lance to say,
"The Mamba is looking like the Mamba."
I remember watching this game live, being in awe and appreciating vintage Kobe in the latter years of his career. The Warriors score again. Kobe has the ball and makes a cut to the basket, and then he goes down. The crowd waited patiently for Kobe to jump back up and play through it like he had time and time again, but this time it was different. He said he knew his Achilles was torn. As he was sitting on the floor, Kobe then did the most Kobe Bryant thing he's ever done and tried to force the Achilles to reattach itself by rubbing the wounded area. It obviously didn't work. Kobe knew his season was likely done, but on this night, his job was not yet finished on the court. At this point, Kobe had fought through so much and had pushed through so much adversity, but he had one more fighting effort to make. Kobe had to shoot 2 free throws. If Kobe's injury forced him to leave the game and he was unable to shoot these free throws, then the Warriors would have had the choice of which Lakers player they wanted to shoot the free throws in place of Kobe. With a terrible foul shooter like Dwight Howard on the team, and with the Lakers down by 2 points, with only minutes remaining and with the playoffs on the line, shooting the foul shots was the only option in Kobe's mind. He proceeded to gingerly approach the free throw line, with his face visibly trying to suppress the pain. Kobe proceeded to knock down both free throws and provide the last bit of help he would ever make for the Lakers at a postseason run. Kobe walked into the locker room with a torn Achilles under his own strength, once again demonstrating the proud warrior that he is. If you ask me, this was the true end of the Kobe Bryant we always knew. To Kobe's credit, he did make his return to the court, but from this point on, his career was plagued by injuries and he never again played at an elite MVP caliber level. Although this was a sad and tragic ending to this season for Kobe, there was strangely a lot of beauty in it too. Kobe was always known as a warrior, and that's what he was this year as he carried the team and fought to the very end. The 60 points in his final game was incredible, but to me, this Achilles game versus the Warriors was the end of the Black Mamba. Kobe's career ended on a 17-65 team on a meaningless regular season game, but the Black Mamba's reign ended making his final stand on his last championship push, forcing his body to give everything it could, even to the point that it eventually broke down on him. Thanks to his efforts, the Lakers did make the playoffs that year. They were swept in the first round of the playoffs by the San Antonio Spurs. Dwight Howard left in the offseason, and Mike D'Antoni was fired 1 year later. There are many what-ifs when we look back at the twilight years of Kobe's career. What if the Chris Paul trade had actually gone through? What if the Lakers hired Phil Jackson instead of Mike D'Antoni? Phil Jackson was clearly the better fit for that team. If Phil was the one coaching those Lakers, do they win more games, resulting in Kobe playing less minutes and never tearing his Achilles? Did Kobe lose out on more elite years all because of this decision? I believe so, but we'll never know for sure.
Today, I have a story from the NBA All-Defender Shane Battier, as he describes a game he was in with Kobe Bryant. Take a listen.
So here I am, rookie, playing 40 minutes a night, guarding every 2 in the league. Guarding Kobe, guarding AI, guarding Paul Pierce, guarding Manu. You name it. Like whoever the top. So
right away.
So like I learned, like I got my ass beat, but I learned. Kobe, my favorite Kobe story is, and Kobe, you know, may he rest in peace, was only probably like 2 weeks older than me.
Yeah.
But like, because he went out of school, you know, I went to school for 4 years. It seemed like we were different ages, but he was only 2 weeks older than me. And my rookie year,
young boy, though.
My rookie year, here I am again, Duke boy. You know, I got him. I got Kobe. I got him. I got him. All right, and so I learned what Kobe Island is. Kobe Island is when you're guarding Kobe Bryant, you turn around and you got no help side defense. You're on an island.
Yeah,
it's a lonely place to be.
Definitely
This cat, and I didn't know how to guard like I would later on. He scored 63 points on me in 3 quarters. I mean, the Lakers are good. They're beating us so bad that he didn't even play the 4th quarter. He for sure would have had 80, for sure, without a doubt. You know, and it was in Staples Center, and I'm embarrassed because he just
going through one.
Me. And so I'm like, man, I gotta figure this guy out because I'm gonna see him for the next 10 years, hopefully.
Yeah, right.
And I gotta figure this cat out.
The conversation continues, and Shane talks about how he started trying to block the Mamba's vision by literally covering Kobe's face with his hand. This method of defense was something Battier famously tried a lot when he battled against Kobe and the Lakers in the 2009 Western Conference semifinals. Let's go back to his original story though, where he says that Kobe scored 63 points in only 3 quarters. Apparently, this was the beatdown that Shane needed in order for him to rethink how he defended the Mamba moving forward. In order to figure out which game this was, let's revisit the details of this story. For one, he clearly stated that it occurred in his rookie season. 2, he said that it happened in Staples Center, which narrows down the possibilities quite a bit. And 3, he said it was a blowout victory for the Lakers, which is why Kobe didn't even have to play in the 4th quarter. Shane Battier's rookie season was the 2001 to 2002 season, and his Memphis Grizzlies only played against Kobe and the Lakers twice in Staples Center that year. The first game was on November 9th, 2001, and it was a blowout victory for the Lakers, 110-86. But the thing is, it couldn't have been this contest, because it was actually a very ugly performance for both players, as Battier only had 2 points on 0 of 9 shooting, while Kobe had just 13 points on 5 of 15 shooting from the field. So that brings us to the only other possibility, which was later that season. It's January 14th, 2002. The 12-24 Grizzlies versus the 26-8 Lakers in Staples Center. Not only do I firmly believe this is the contest that Shane was talking about, but as a lifelong Lakers fan who actually saw this game live, it seems rather obvious. Now there's actually some extra context that you should know about this night. For one, the Lakers were coming off of a brutal 2-point loss in Chicago just a couple evenings earlier. It wasn't a tough night simply for the loss, but the Lakers also lost their superstar center for a while. Late in the 4th quarter in the Chicago Bulls game, Shaq was looking for the ball in the post when he took a hit from both Brad Miller and Charles Oakley. Now this game was really chippy up to that moment, and Miller actually had a history of fouling Shaq pretty hard when he got deep under the basket. Well, this was one hard foul too many, and Shaq snapped. One could argue that it was actually Oakley who dealt the most punishment. But apparently, Shaq didn't know that, and instead, he unleashed his fury on Brad Miller. Fortunately, Shaq is about as accurate with his punches as he is with his free throws. And before he could unleash a second punch, they were completely surrounded by players and referees. For the altercation, Shaq was suspended a total of 3 games. The following contest was the one between Shane Battier's Grizzlies and Kobe Bryant's Lakers. As a way to show support for his suspended teammate, Kobe actually wrote Shaq's jersey number on his shoes prior to the game. With Shaq out of the game, Kobe needed to shoulder more of the offensive burden for Los Angeles. So in a way, torching Battier wasn't really personal, but it was just necessary. When the game started, Kobe's aggressiveness could clearly be seen, as he buried this crazy scooping shot to give the Lakers their first points. It actually wasn't Battier who was initially assigned to guard Kobe, but it was the Grizzlies' 6'8" power forward Grant Long, who was a 14th year veteran in the league. After Kobe scored roughly 10 points on a helpless Long, Memphis decided to make the switch and give Battier his shot at guarding Kobe. But things became even worse at that point. Kobe was absolutely abusing Shane with every kind of shot you could think of, from electrifying slams to contested mid-range jumpers and deep 3-pointers. Even Kobe's future teammate Pau Gasol was getting torched on some occasions. At the end of the first half, Kobe had a whopping total of 36 points. Into the second half now, and Kobe continues to mercilessly destroy Shane Battier. Once Kobe scored his 47th point, Shane had received his 4th foul in the third quarter and had to head to the bench. At this point, the Grizzlies were in full desperation mode and put the 6'5" Rodney Buford on Kobe to see if he had any luck. But to the surprise of absolutely no one, that didn't work either. The previous NBA high that season was 53 points by Tim Duncan. Kobe surpassed that and had 56 points with 20 seconds left in the third quarter. With Kobe's final shot, he launched a three-pointer, and if that shot had gone in, it would have equaled him to the entire Grizzlies total through 3 quarters at 59. Funny enough, it was actually his future teammate Pau Gasol who blocked that shot and ruined that chance of Kobe achieving history. Years later, Kobe would outscore a Dallas Mavericks team through 3 quarters, 62-61. And it's crazy to think that he nearly outscored an entire team through 3 quarters twice. Obviously, Kobe proceeded to sit out the entirety of the fourth with a victory locked in. Ultimately, the Lakers won the game 120-81. And on the night, Kobe finished with 56 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists on 21 of 34 shooting and 11 of 12 from the free throw line. So Shane Battier was just a little bit inaccurate with the story. He was correct that the Lakers won big in Staples, but Kobe scored 56 points and not 63, which resulted in Battier coming up with some unconventional ways of trying to stop Kobe in the future. And after what the Mamba did to him in his rookie season, can you really blame him? I certainly don't. I vividly remember watching this game for several reasons. One, it was Kobe's first 50-point game that his team actually won. 2, it was also his first game where he scored at least 50 points through 3 quarters, which he went on to do 4 more times in his career. And lastly, it was one of the first times where Kobe demonstrated just how offensively explosive he could be if Shaq wasn't in the lineup taking many of the opportunities. Today, I have a very famous story from Amon Shumpert as he describes a game he was in with Kobe Bryant. Take a listen.
Which I can't remember how much he had, but I knew I had multiple steals against him. To where in the game, in my head, all I'm thinking of is when I have this conversation with my brother after the game, how I'm gonna tell him how I stole the ball from Kobe, how I stripped Kobe before he was finna take a shot, how I drove by Kobe and got a dunk. Like, I'm thinking about all these things in my head. I'm like so geeked. The fourth quarter start.
Wait, you were already celebrating?
Not celebrating.
In your head, though, you were already like,
in my head, I'm just thinking. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I'm just thinking, like, gee, I was having that out of body experience. Like,
yes,
gee,
like, let me appreciate this is amazing.
Right, we in the garden, they going crazy. I got my player editions on. I just stole that thing from Kobe. Like, you know what I mean? Linsanity was going on. I'm like,
wait, was this the Friday night game in the garden, the Linsanity game?
It might have been.
But the one that
no, it wasn't that. I honestly can't.
Because Kobe went for 34 that night.
This is what I'm explaining.
And he went off in the fourth quarter.
This is what I'm explaining.
Okay.
The fourth quarter starts. And Kobe said, "You had a great game."
Oh my God.
Said, "Yo, you had a great game, young fella." But I'm looking like, bro.
There's still another quarter.
I swear I looked at the clock like. But I'm looking like, it's 12 minutes. What you talking about? Like, what was that? You know what I'm saying? Like, you ain't said nothing the whole game. I've been talking shit. I done stole the ball. I'm hyped as hell. It's Kobe Bryant. He ain't said not one word to me. Great game, young fella. You know, locked in. The man come down. You remember he came shot fake, threw it off the glass, caught it, threw it to the corner. I'm like, bro, what you on? Like, bro, you been regular all game. Shot, get to the spot, shot fake, spin, pivot over here, spin back on the foot, drop it off the glass. I'm like, bro, what's going on? Then he pulled up from like 35 feet on some Steph Curry shit before Steph was doing that. He pulled up and laced it. I'm like, they called a timeout. Dan Tony looking at me. I'm like, bro, I ain't.
Now, as we all know, this is an incredibly famous and popular story from Shumpert, as pretty much anyone who closely follows the NBA is familiar with it. I'm sure most of you have seen the highlights from this contest, And honestly, it wasn't difficult for me to verify which game it actually was. For one, Iman Shumpert only played 3.5 seasons for the New York Knicks. Since the Knicks and Lakers were always East versus West matchups, the two teams only played each other twice a year, and only once a year in New York, which is where Shumpert said it took place. In his rookie season, Kobe and Iman were both active. In his sophomore season, Shumpert was injured and missed his New York game against Kobe. In Shumpert's third season, Kobe missed the New York game due to a fractured knee. And in Shumpert's fourth season, he was traded away from New York before he could play the Lakers. This means that there was only one game in NBA history that had Kobe Bryant and Iman Shumpert up against each other in New York, and it took place on February 10th, 2012. Although most people in this current year remember this contest for the Kobe and Shumpert angle, that was actually not the talk of the town before and after the game took place. You see, there was this undrafted 23-year-old guard out of Harvard University named Jeremy Lin, who had been fighting for simply a roster spot in the NBA for the last couple of seasons. But just a few games prior to the matchup with the Lakers, Lin had taken the reins of the point guard position. And in his first major minutes versus New Jersey, he dropped 25 points, 7 assists, and 5 rebounds. In the next game against Utah, Lin had 28 points, 8 assists, and 2 rebounds. And then in the third game against Washington, he had 23 points, 10 assists, and 4 rebounds. This incredibly unforeseen explosion of elite basketball quickly earned him the nickname Linsanity. Seemingly, he had emerged out of nowhere and was taking all of the media attention in the Big Apple and of the basketball world in general. The night before the Knicks and Lakers were set to square off, Kobe was asked about Lin's breakout performances, and this is what he had to say.
Have you been following that story at all? What? Jeremy Lin, are you following that story at all?
No idea. I know who he is, but I don't really know what's going on too much with that.
Are you surprised at the production that Lin's had over the past week?
I don't even know what he's done. I have no idea what you guys are talking about. I'll take a look.
Well, although the Mamba was unfamiliar with Lin's eruption, he would soon be made very aware. The Lakers were on the second night of a back-to-back after a tough overtime victory over the rivaled Boston Celtics, and had an underwhelming 6-seeded record of 15-11, while the New York Knicks were on a 3-game winning streak but sitting at only 11-15. The anticipated matchup wasn't Shumpert versus Kobe, but rather Kobe versus Linsanity. When the game actually started, it was Jeremy Lin who looked like the poised veteran player, while Kobe looked like anything but. Lin continued his hot streak, hitting an array of shots to open the game. At the end of the first quarter, Lin had 10 points on 4 of 7 shooting, while Kobe had 6 points on just 1 of 5 shooting. The second quarter was a bit stunning as well, as the Mamba attempted only 1 shot that entire period, missing his lone attempt. As Shumpert described, not only did Kobe seem regular, but dare I say he seemed low energy. On the other hand, Lin kept torching LA, as he scored another 8 points in the second quarter, giving him a total of 18 points and 5 assists heading into halftime, and the Knicks held the lead 49-41. Now, contrary to popular belief, it wasn't actually Iman Shumpert who spent the majority of the time guarding Kobe up to this point, but it was actually his 6'7" teammate Landry Fields. Heading into the third quarter now, and Fields continues to do a solid job of guarding Bryant. Kobe proceeded to miss his first 5 shots of the third quarter, making him an ice-cold 1 of 11 from the field. It appeared as if he was going to have an embarrassing finish and one of the worst games of his entire career, when suddenly Kobe hit a switch. You could see the intensity on the Mamba's face as he decided to be more aggressive offensively and was now committed to shooting his way out of this slump. After starting 1 of 11, Kobe proceeded to hit 5 out of his next 6 shots, and the momentum started shifting back in the Lakers' favor. Bryant cut the lead down to 6 at the end of the third, and that's when a concerned Mike D'Antoni decided to make a defensive switch from Landry Fields to Iman Shumpert. And it was at this point where the famous interaction happened between Kobe and Iman, as he told him that he had a great game. Kobe immediately went to work as he scored his first basket of the fourth by overpowering Shumpert to the cup. With just under 8 minutes left, Kobe got the iconic off-the-backboard assist to Pau Gasol. At this point, Kobe was unleashing his wrath, as he was doing everything in his power to keep the Lakers in the game. But what Shumpert doesn't mention in his interview is how it wasn't just the Kobe show, but it was an epic solo duel down the stretch, as Kobe and Jeremy Lin were trading clutch baskets throughout the fourth. Every time Kobe did something special, it seemed like Lin had an immediate answer on the other end. With just under 6 minutes left in the fourth, Lin hit this dagger three-pointer, which extended the Knicks' lead to 13. And although Kobe wasn't aware of Lin's sanity the night before, he certainly understood it now, as he was witnessing its very peak. The Mamba kept shrinking the lead back to single digits, and the trading of clutch plays continued all the way down to the final minute of the game. With 52 seconds left, Lin went to the free throw line where he scored his 37th and 38th point, and the New York crowd chanted MVP in his honor. Then, with 17 seconds left, Kobe hit that deep Steph Curry type 3 that Shumpert alluded to, which cut the lead down to just 5. But at that point, it was too late, and the Knicks ended up securing the victory 92-85, which extended their streak to 4 games, and Linsanity eventually took that streak to 7. Despite it being a very low-scoring affair for the two teams, it was still a classic solo battle, as Lin finished with 38 points and 7 assists on 13 of 23 shooting, while Kobe poured in 34 points and 10 rebounds on 11 of 29 from the field. Ultimately, Shumpert appears to be another accurate storyteller in this series. And what amazes me most about all of this is how I remember watching this game in 2012. And at that point in time, I remember that everyone was talking about the craziness of Linsanity and how he outplayed Kobe Bryant. In 2012, Kobe was the afterthought of this evening. But now, in this modern year, it seems that Jeremy Lin has become the afterthought, thanks to the hilarious and epic storytelling of Iman Shumpert and the immortalized reputation of Kobe Bryant.